Chess is easy, and most people makes it way more harder than it needs to be. Today I'm going to be breaking down all the core fundamental stuff that you need to know to get better at chess. Nothing that you need to memorize, just pure understanding. And these are not the same recycled advice that you've already heard 100 times. What I'm about to show you is different. And if you watch the full video and just apply what I teach, you will get better. So our first opponent is 500. Going to be climbing up the ladder by just following simple principles. I'm going to be developing 4 of my minor pieces. He developed his knight to attack my pawn. I'm going to play knight c6. That's 1 out of 4 minor pieces that is developed. And then I'm going to castle my king. My opponent is playing the Italian game. I'm going to play the 2 knights defense. So I have 2 out of 4 pieces developed. My opponent plays pawn to d3. That's the correct move. Now let's play bishop to c5. We're still in an Italian game. I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. And then my opponent plays knight to c3. Now, whenever you're playing the Italian game, I usually recommend if you're playing against the Italian game, don't be quick to castle. Just play moves like pawn to d6, delay your castling, complete your development first. Then you can start thinking of, do I want to castle on the queen side? Do I want to castle on the king side? My opponent plays bishop to e3. He's playing all the best moves, by the way. I want you to notice how he is also delaying his castle. And if I take his bishop and then he takes back, it's going to be situation where he has the double pawns in the center of the board, and that's very good for white. And I want you guys to keep in mind, to take is a mistake. You should only trade when it improves your position. So if I take his bishop, he takes back, then his rook gets the open file. So I'm going to simply pull my bishop back to b6, and then if he takes my bishop and I takes back, my rook gets the open file. Now pawn to a3 was played, which is a very nice move because he's basically defending against moves like knight to a5. And if I play knight to a5, his bishop is going to get trapped. So he plays a3, so he's able to pull his bishop back to a2. But now I'm just going to use the time to simply develop my bishop. I want you guys to notice how I'm delaying my castling. I am going to castle my king, but I just want to complete my development. Now, my opponent just made his first mistake. He plays knight to g5, a bit of a premature attack. I mean, yes, he's attacking my bishop. Yes, he's forcing my bishop to move. But his knight is on my half of the board too quickly. Let's just first take his bishop, and then once he takes back, I can simply castle my king. And then once I castle my king like this, my development is going to be complete. His king is still in the center of the board, so he needs to deal with that ASAP. And because this knight is on my half of the board, I also have a plan of simply chasing that knight out of my half of the board. Now, my opponent decided to play queen to f3. Looks like he's planning on castling on the queen side. I don't mind if he castled on the queen side, by the way. In fact, I am prepared to take his bishop on e3 because now I give him the double pawns in the center, but his double pawns are not connected to the rest of the pawns. So those are just weak pawns. There's another principle that I want you guys to keep in mind, and it is called principle of neutralization, where whenever there are pieces on your half of the board, you want to play moves like h6 to chase pieces out of your half of the board. Now he's forced to move away his knight. I want you guys to notice all I'm doing is developing my pieces, completing my development. Now that my development is complete, this is when I'm going to start my attack. Now, attacking in chess comes from planning. It's very important that you have a plan. Planning in chess comes from pawn breaks. So I want to know where I'm going to do my pawn breaks. His king is still in the center of the board, so not really sure if I'm going to play f5 to attack his king or b5 to attack on the queen side. So for now, I'm going to play knight to e7. This is a typical move in the Italian game, by the way, because the knight could always go to g6, which would defend the king. Now, my opponent plays knight to d5. For some reason, he's not castling his king, so I'm happy with that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the f knight to take his knight, and once he takes back with the pawn, now I'm able to play pawn to f5, and this is basically me starting my attack. I want to play moves like pawn to e4, attacking his queen, knight to g6, put my knight on this very nice e5 square, and then he plays pawn to e4. Like, why is this guy not castling his king? Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Let's take on e4. Obviously, his queen has to take. His king is not able to castle on the king side anymore because my rook prevents it. And because his king is in the center, I'm going to play pawn to c6 with the whole idea of opening the center. The best he could do is to castle on the queen side, but for some reason, he's just not castling. Let's just take back the pawn. Now, the good thing is, even if he decides to castle on the queen side, my rook gets this open file pointing towards his king. I mean, the guy was playing so well, but why is he not castling his king? Okay, he finally decides to castle the king, and I have a plan to start an attack on his king. But first, I have to ensure that all my pieces are in the game. If you notice, every single piece is active except this rook on a8. So let me play rook to b8, putting my rook on this open file, targeting this weak b2 pawn. That was the plan anyways. And I want you guys to keep in mind, when it comes to attacking, you want to ensure that you're targeting those pawns around the opponent's king. That's a successful way to attack. My opponent decided to play pawn to b3, and we generally don't want to be pushing pawns on the side that our king is on. That is going to be creating a lot of weaknesses. Now, his pawn is no longer guarding his pawn on a3, so now I'm going to play the move queen to a5, attacking his weak, unprotected a3 pawn, and once he defends it, I'm going to try to get my knight in the game to join the attack. Pawn to a5 was played. I like what I'm seeing. Well, not in a good way for him because he's pushing pawns on the side that his king is on. You should not be playing chess like that. Now I'm going to play the move knight to f5. Now, knight f5 has a lot of purpose. It defends my pawn on d6. It does blunder my pawn on c6, but I don't mind losing this pawn because it will allow me to get more open lines pointing towards his king. So I don't mind if he take on c6. If he does not take on c6, however, my knight gets the d4 square, and then in the future, I'll be able to sacrifice. So he did take on c6. Now, there's one thing that I need to be aware of, and that's queen to d5. If he manages to put his queen on d5, then all my attack will just go to waste because it will force the queens off the board. So before I continue, I'm going to play the move queen to b4. So that way, if he checks, I'm just going to move my king. My plan is to play knight to d4. And then I'm already thinking of sacrificing my knight on b3 or either sacrificing my knight on c2, going for some checkmates. Queen to d5 check. Let's go king to h8. And queens are still on the board, which means my attack is still valid. And I want you guys to keep in mind, if someone is attacking you, one of the best things you could do is just to trade the queens off the board. Once you trade the queens off the board, then there will be no more attack, and then your king will be safe. So he puts his queen back on c6. That did not do anything. Yeah, that really did not do anything. Now I'm just going to continue with my plan. Knight to d4, attacking his queen, threatening c2, threatening b3. I want to sacrifice my knight. I also want to play queen to c3, threatening checkmate on c2. This is just winning. He played the opening well, but his middle game was just bad. And I've seen a lot of persons where they play the opening well and the middle game is just bad. If this is you though, watching this full video will help your middle game, especially your end game. So he plays the move queen to c7, and this is a very beautiful checkmate. And by the way, please be pausing the videos and try to find the checkmates that I'm going to find. But here's the mate that I'm seeing. When it comes to finding the best moves on the board, it's very important that you look for the moves that you can play on the opponent's half of the board. It's very important that you start by looking on your forcing moves first, which is a check. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to play the move knight takes e3, checking the king, sacrificing my knight. If he does not take, then I'm just going to move away my knight and gain a discovered attack on his king. However, if he takes my knight, queen to c3 is going to be a check. This king is going to be forced to move to b1. Then I'm going to play rook takes b3 check. He has to play king to a2, and then queen to b2 is going to be a checkmate. So let's play the move knight takes b3 check. He took the pawn on c3, and as we said, queen to c3 check. The king has to go to b1. He moves his king to b1. Rook takes b3 check. The king has to go to a2. And that's a checkmate. What have we learned? Don't forget to castle your king. It's like the most important thing to do. But I'm going to be doing the same thing, but against someone at the 600 level. So stick around. My opponent is now 600. Same treatment. Let's hit him with e4. We're going to be developing our pieces before we start any attack. Knight f3, hit the pawn. And then he plays pawn d6 to guard the pawn. I recommend that you guys play knight c6 because pawn d6 blocks out this bishop. There's no way to punish him for doing this just yet. So we're just going to be developing our pieces, but he's going to be having a hard time finishing his development. Now, he plays bishop to e6. That's a decent move. But here's what I'm going to do. Now, usually it's okay to pull the bishop back to b3. To take is a mistake. But because it's very easy to get my king out the center of the board, and he is still 1, 2, 3 moves away from castling, I'm going to take the bishop with the whole idea of liquidating the position. And once he takes back, now I hit him with pawn to d4. So I'm basically already trying to open the center of the board with his king in the center. Now, knight c6 is already a strategic mistake because I'm able to take. If he takes with the pawn, he has double pawns, but I'm not going to be doing this just yet. It's usually good to keep the tension in the position as well. So let me just use the time to get my king out the center of the board. Then he plays queen to d7. Now, queen to d7 is an indication that he's planning on castling on the queen side, but I have a very nice idea that I'm going to be showing you guys. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a plan which will assist me on planting my knight on this weak e6 square. It starts by playing pawn to d5. Now, it looks as if I'm trying to close position. But once my pawn gains access over this weak e6 square, and remember our weakness is a pawn or a square that can't be guarded by another pawn. Once my pawn gains access to this square, it's going to be very easy for my knight to get access to this square. And keep in mind, if you're able to get a minor piece on the opponent's half of the board, especially the 5th or the 6th rank, then that minor piece is usually stronger than a rook. So he didn't go for that. He decided to play knight to d4, but clearly he does not know how to count because he's basically putting his knight on a square that is only being guarded once. But I have 1, 2 pieces covering that square. So all I need to do is to simply take the knight on d4, and then I'm going to be winning a pawn. Now, after he takes, I want an open position. So I could simply take the pawn, but then he plays e5, attacks my queen. I would still be winning, but I'm going to be playing an in-between move. So first I'm going to take the pawn on e6, forcing his queen to take. And then after his queen takes, then I take this pawn on d4. So he decided to castle his king, which is a mistake. Now, the mistake that my opponent just played is called a drawback mistake. Persons at this level usually make this mistakes a lot because with 600, 700 level, a lot of persons, they're going to be just putting their pieces on squares where you could just capture it. But the mistake that they're going to be making is, if you notice, the rook on a8 was guarding the pawn. But because he castled his king, there's nothing guarding the pawn. So we could say his last move had a drawback. The pawn is now just hanging. So now I'm just going to simply take the free pawn. Now I'm ahead by 2 pawns. My development is not complete, so I will not necessarily have any ways to checkmate his king. My queen by itself won't be able to deliver the checkmate, so I'm going to be developing my knight, developing my bishop, swinging my rook in the game, and then that's going to be enough to deliver the checkmate. His queen is able to take my pawn, but I'm actually fine with the queen taking my pawn because keep in mind, his king is very, very vulnerable. Like, check, king up, and then his king is gonna already be in the open. But again, there's no ways to take advantage of this, especially since his queen covers this b7 square. So I'm just going to use the time to develop my knight, gain tempo on his queen. And again, I do not care if he takes my pawn on b2, especially since it's opposite side castles. If he tries to take those pawns, it's basically helping me to get open lines pointing towards his king, and then that's going to be assisting me to deliver my checkmate. So it's best for him to just move the queen and try not to be greedy in this position, which he did. So that's not bad. Again, our checks won't work. If we check, he's going to simply move the king, and I basically gain nothing from that. So let me just use the time to continue with my development. I'm thinking of playing bishop to g5 to develop and attack the rook, but he's just going to play bishop to e7, and I'm basically helping him to liquidate the position. So let's play bishop to e3. All my minor pieces are developed. He still has two of his minor pieces developed, so I'm basically going to use the time to start my attack. He just developed one of his pieces, and to start my attack, I'm going to play the move pawn to a4. And remember what I told you guys about planning? Planning has a lot to do with pawns and pawn breaks and pawn storms. So in this position, what I'm doing, this is called a pawn storm. A pawn storm is basically when you move your pawns forward towards the opponent's pawns. If the king is on the side where the opponent's pawns are, then it's even better. But the whole idea is to use the pawn storm to create a pawn break, and the purpose of a pawn break is to open lines for the pieces. So my opponent just played knight to e4. That's a mistake, by the way. Not a mistake that's going to be costing him pieces, but he is moving the same pieces more than once. Like, why play knight f6 then knight e4 when your bishop is just chilling on the background, when your rook on h8 is not doing anything? Now keep in mind, I can simply keep anything. I want him to take on c3. Because first of all, if he takes on c3, he moves his knight 1, 2, 3 times to take a knight that has only moved once. And if you're good at mathematics, if you move a piece 3 times and trade it for a piece that only move once, then it means that you wasted 2 moves. So I'm just going to continue with my pawn storm, hit him with pawn to a5 with the idea of playing pawn to a6. And then if he takes and I takes, it opens up the b file pointing towards his king. And then it's going to be way easier for me to checkmate this king. So he finally decided to develop his bishop. Well, I'm thinking of just playing pawn to a6. Again, we're just trying to open as much lines as possible. Let's play a6. Usually the best way to defend against these types of attack is to play b6. But b6 in this position would cause more harm, because my pawn on a6 is 2 squares away from queening. So if he plays b6, I take on e4, sack my bishop. Once he takes, rook e1, skewer his queen. Queen has to move. Oh my lord. Okay, ensure that you pause the video and try to calculate on your own. Don't just be lazy and then consuming content, because just consuming content won't help you. So you should actually try to predict the moves that I'm trying to play, so that way your brain is working as well. You shouldn't just be sitting and just consuming, because then you're not going to necessarily remember the stuff that I'm teaching. But anyways, here's what I'm going to do. First, I want to do a removing the guard tactic, because his queen is covering b6. I'm going to take on e4. His queen is going to take on e4. His queen and his bishop is going to be on the same line. And in order to expose his king, I'm going to sacrifice my bishop. And then once his pawn takes, it opens my queen pointing towards his bishop. And because his queen and his bishop is on the same line, I'll be able to play rook to e1, hitting his queen, followed by rook takes e7. So let's play knight takes e4. The queen has to take, otherwise he's just losing material. Then I hit him with bishop takes b6, sacrificing my bishop, with the whole idea of exposing his king. If you can sacrifice material, like if you can sacrifice a minor piece for 2 pawns anytime to expose the opponent's king, it's always going to be worth it. So once he takes, I'm thinking of rook e1 or even rook a4. They're both removing the guard tactic, because if I play rook a4 and the queen takes my rook, then queen to b7 becomes a checkmate. Like, the only reason why queen to b7 it's not a checkmate here is because his queen is guarding. So I should be thinking of removing the guard here. So I told you guys that I wanted rook e1, and then maybe he's just going to play queen c6 and then take his bishop, and I'm still completely winning. But if I hit him with rook a4, it's even more deadly, because if rook a4, if he touches my rook, queen to b7 is a checkmate. Very nice removing the guard tactic. But if I play rook a4 and he pulls his queen back to c6, not accepting the sacrifice, I'm going to hit him with rook to c4, pinning the queen to the king, knowing that his queen is able to take my rook. And if his queen takes my rook, then queen to b7 is a checkmate. So rook to a4 is way better than rook to e1. Now, I'm not seeing how he's going to keep this b7 square guarded. If he's not able to keep the b7 square guarded, then he's just completely losing. Rook to d7 is a nice defense. Okay, he did not see rook to d7. He decided to play queen takes c2, but it's the same thing though. Like, my whole point was to prevent his queen from guarding the b7 square, which simply means that's just a checkmate. What have we learned? At the 6-700 level, a lot of person blunder because of the drawback principle. when it comes to planning, you should think about the pawns, like pawn breaks, pawn storms, and you should always think about sacrificing material in order to expose the opponent's king.
Yeah, I'm going to be the same thing, but at the 700 level. Stick around.
Now we're playing against someone at the 700 level. It's the same idea. Let's start by playing e4. We're going to be developing our pieces as quickly as possible. He plays d6. Let's just play d4. I think he's playing the paired defense, but against the paired defense, we're just going to be developing our pieces normally, guarding my pawn. And then after g6, I'm going to play the move bishop to f4 here. This is actually a transposition into like the Joe Bava London, and this could actually get very, very dangerous. For example, after this bishop to g7 move, pawn to e5 is actually already winning. And it's actually bad for him to take on e5 because this is actually a Joe Bava trap. You don't want to be falling for this trap. I think the best black should do here is move his knight back to d7 or even h5, even though h5 is bad. He took on e5. This is going to get very, very ugly. He's going to either get checkmate or lose his rook in this position. But let's start by simply taking his knight. Now, it just looks so natural. Oh, taking on d1. It's just a natural move. Like, okay, let's just trade queens. Then I move the knight. But it's actually losing. Look at this. I'm going to take back on d1. My rook guards all of this file. He moves his knight out the way. But once I play knight to d5, how exactly will he guard this c7 pawn? This is the Joe Bava London. It's a very, very nice opening. Knight to a6 is losing. The best move in this position is actually to castle. Knight to a6 is completely losing. All I'm going to do here is take on c7, forking the king and the rook. But you guys are probably saying, you're not able to take on c7. Obviously, the knight is guarding c7, which is why I'm going to be using a tactic called removing the guard. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take on a6 first, and then after he takes, which is bad, I'm just going to checkmate him. I'm going to play knight takes c7 check. Maybe he thinks I want his rook, but the king has to go to f8, and then rook to d8 is going to be a checkmate. So let's go knight takes c7 check. He has to move the king. I don't want the rook because that's just the checkmate. I'm not going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 800 level. Stick around. The opponent is now 800. We're going to be doing the same thing. Just regular chess. He starts with e4. Let's just play e5 here. Again, we're going to be developing our pieces, hit him with a pawn break. If he doesn't castle the king, we open the center. He attacks my knight. Let me develop my knight, guard my pawn. Are we going to see an Italian game? This is the 2 knights game. This is fine. Once I play knight to f6, this is now called 4 knights game. And it's just going to be regular stuff. If he sacrifices knight on e5, then it's called a Halloween gambit. It could get tricky with the Halloween gambit. But then he plays bishop to c4. It's every single video I have to tell you guys why this is a mistake. Come on, guys. Like, this is a mistake because all I'm going to do here is sacrifice my knight on e4. You don't want to allow black to equalize this queen. I'm black. Black should not be better because once he takes, I'm going to play d5. So the position is already equal. Even if he sacrifices bishop on f7, this also won't work. So he took a knight on e4. We're going to play the move pawn to d5 in this position. Now we're hitting the knight, we're hitting the bishop. He's forced to react to this move. If he moves his bishop, we take the knight. If he moves the knight, we take the bishop. The best move here, by the way, guys, if you fall for this trap, is to just pull the bishop back to d3. Let's see what this guy plays. Okay, so he decided to sacrifice his bishop. Fine, let's just take the bishop. I'm also attacking his unprotected knight, so he has to react to that. And if he just plays a regular move like pawn to d3, then I'm just going to continue with my normal, regular development. So he guards the knight. Now, since there's nothing special or fancy happening here, I'm just going to continue to develop my pieces. Let's just develop my bishop, pinning the knight to the queen. After this, I'm going to probably castle my king. I'm going to probably develop my bishop. Nothing fancy, just developing my pieces while these players just blunder away their pieces. Let's see. Is this going to be the move where he blunders? So he pulls his knight back to c3. It's very important that we look on the opponent's last move. Check to see what it's doing. It is attacking my queen. The question is, do I want to even move the queen? Do I just go bishop here and pin the knight? That's possible, but let's just move the queen here just to keep things safe. I could castle my king. I could develop my bishop to d4 and hit the knight. Now, keep in mind, because his knight is pinned, I have some ideas of playing knights to d4 and applying pressure to the pinned knight. He decided to develop this bishop. Not bad. Not simply just my king though. I decided to castle my king on the queen side, which means if he dares to castle on the king side, I'm gonna do pawn storm. We attack his king on the king side. Maybe he tries to run to the queen side as well. Let's see. He's trying to run his king to the queen side, but here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna develop my bishop to b4, pinning his knight to the king. If he tries to castle on the queen side, I'm gonna simply take out the knight and his king side is gonna be all exposed, and then I'm gonna attack his king anyways. So he decided to retreat and run to the king side. Now, what I would love to do here is to play knight to d4 and apply pressure to the pinned knight, but he's just gonna take with the bishop, so I won't really gain much from that. But here's what I'm gonna do instead. I'm gonna play the move rook to e8, putting my rook on the same line as the opponent's queen. Anytime you get a chance to put your rook on the same line as the opponent's queen, put your bishop on the same line as the opponent's queen or king, then there will be some very nice tactic happening. Look at this. My bishop is pinning his knight to his queen. My rook is on the same line as his queen. He just plays knight to e4. What does this do? I have no clue. Maybe he wants to play knight c5, literally. But because his knight is pinned, I'm just going to win the game by applying pressure to the pin piece. Now, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to start by playing the move pawn to f5, which means I'm forcing this knight to move. And once this knight moves away, I'm going to play pawn to e4. And then my pawn is going to be attacking his knight. My bishop is going to be pinning his knight. And that's what we called PP on the PP. So he pulls the knight back to c3. So you could say he was just wasting time. Like, how do you know when you're wasting time? If you just play a move and then you pull the move back, that's just wasting time. Now I hit him with a move like pawn to e4. His knight is pinned and I am applying pressure to the pin piece. This is how you win material in chess. It doesn't really matter what he does now. If he takes, I'll take back, and it's going to be the same conundrum for him. This is now already losing. What did I do to win this game? Nothing fancy. The guy just fell for a trap in the opening. It was a little mistake, and then he decided to castle his king into an attack. So he decided to take. Let's just take back. And again, I'm just going to take the knight on the next move. The knight is not able to move unless he wants to lose his queen. Let's see what he's going to play. Maybe he's going to play knight takes e4, but I'm just going to take on e4 because my pawn is being guarded. Okay, so he decided to play queen to c4. Now, I also want to give you guys another tip. Always ensure that all your pieces are protecting each other. For example, this queen to c4 move, if my bishop was unprotected, then maybe I wouldn't be winning in this position. But I'm just going to take the knight. It's still completely winning. My bishop on g4 is being guarded by my queen. And whenever all your pieces are protecting each other, then you could say all your pieces are coordinated. And having good coordination is a sign of a good chess player. Okay, now he decides to play pawn to h3, which attacks my bishop. Things are going to get fancy now. Now I'm going to get fancy. Because why can't I just sacrifice my bishop on h3? And if he takes on h3, I play queen takes h3. How will he defend queen to g2 checkmate? There's literally nothing he could do to prevent my bishop from going to g2 and deliver a checkmate. I was also thinking of taking here and then the king takes. I go here with the rook, but we're going for mate. So let's take on h3. And if he decides to take on f3, his rook is also hanging. But you guys know me. If I'm attacking someone's king, I'm not trying to win a rook. This is a mistake that a lot of players make when they're playing chess, by the way. Like, they're probably attacking somebody and then they see a free pawn and then all of a sudden they abandon the entire attack just to take a free pawn. You should not be too materialistic when you play chess, especially when you're attacking someone's king. You should be going for the king. Okay, so he decided to move his rook to d1. That's a sensible move because my queen is under attack. And I wanted to play queen to g4 and deliver a checkmate here. But his queen defends the g4 square. But all I'm going to do is play queen to f5, the same idea of if you dare to touch my... Okay. He could take my bishop. Because if he takes my bishop and my queen takes, yes, queen f1. But I'm going to play queen g4 check. And then once his king moves, I hit him with a rook lift. Okay, so he plays pawn to g3. I still want to deliver a checkmate here, so I'm going to play the move bishop to g2. And my whole idea of bishop to g2 is to play queen to h3, followed by queen to h1, and deliver the checkmate. But yeah, that's the move that I did not prepare for that move, actually. Because now I'm not able to play queen to h3, so how am I going to checkmate the guy? Okay, so let's go bishop to e7. Now, all I'm trying to do is a big removing the guard tactic. Like, I'm just going to do everything in my power to get the guy's queen off the h file so that way I can manage to play queen to h3 followed by queen to h1. Like, if he plays something like queen to h2, then it's going to take me way longer. Rook to e5 is a nice try. If I'm able to get my knight to h3, okay, that's not even a checkmate. So, yes, he's attacking my queen. I'm also attacking his queen. And keep in mind, I could simply sacrifice my queen for the rook, and then once he takes my queen, I take his queen, and that's winning my t-rock. But I'm going to play the move knight to d5 here. And why I'm playing knight e5 is just to defend my queen. I'm still attacking his queen. But in the future, if it's possible, I would like to get my knight to g4, especially if he tries to put his queen on h2. Let's see how he responds to this. Bishop to f4. The guy forgot that I was attacking his queen. That's crazy. Let's just take the free queen, which means there's nothing he could do to prevent queen to h3, followed by queen to h1. Checkmate. Yeah, he thought he was cooking. He forgot that I was attacking his queen. Okay, so he pulls his rook back to d3. That's not going to help him. Like, I could take the rook here, but we're going for the king. So let's just play queen to h3. Queen to h1 will be a checkmate, regardless of what move he plays. Unless he plays rook to d1 check, but I'll just take the rook. So I could pre-move this. Yeah, he plays rook to d8 check. Let's just take the rook. And now I could just pre-move queen to h1, because that's just a checkmate. Pawn g4, that's just a checkmate. What have we learned? Whenever you pin a piece, try to apply pressure to that piece. It's called PP on the PP. Now I'm going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 900 level. Stick around. Our opponent is now in the 900 region. Let's start by playing pawn to e4. He plays pawn to e5. Let's just play knight to f3, attack pawn. He guards it, and we're now in an Italian game. He's now playing the two knights defense. I want you guys to keep in mind, knight to c3 here is a mistake. It's very important that we play pawn to d3 in order to guard the pawn. And after this, we're going to be following our regular Italian plans. And I'm happy that you guys know exactly how to play the Italian game because you guys have been watching my videos. Pawn to h6 is not necessary here. He's basically trying to prevent a knight or a bishop from going to g5, but he could have just played bishop to c5. But I'm just going to develop my pieces. Now I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. My king is not yet castled, but he's pinning my knight to my king. So I'm going to use the time to simply get my king out the center of the board. Now, this person is 900, by the way, and he develops his bishop, pinned the knight, and then he took the knight. Don't be playing chess like this. Bishops are better than knights. So all I'm going to do here is simply take the bishop back on c3, and then he plays pawn to a6. That's an unnecessary move. But you guys know the drill. Because my king is out the center of the board, and my opponent's king is in the center of the board, my plan will be to open the center of the board. So I want to play pawn to d4, but I don't want to lose my pawn on e4. So I'm going to start by playing the move rook to e1, guarding the pawn on e4. So my opponent plays pawn to d6. Now I'm going to play the move pawn to d4 because the guy's king is in the center of the board, and my plan is to open the center. He needs to castle his king as quickly as possible, by the way. Another good move would be to play bishop to g4, pinning my knight to my queen. Usually, you don't want to be allowing this, so he decided to pin. However, if someone pins your knight to your queen, you have to immediately play a move like h3. And based on his last move, because he just took my knight on c3, I don't think he's going to pull the bishop back. I think he's going to take, which is just bad. Like, this is a bad move. Don't be playing like this guy, by the way, because now my queen is going to simply take. And then he plays knight to a5. So he just decided that he does not want to get castled, which is fine. If he doesn't want to get castled, that's on him. He's attacking my bishop. We all know that bishops are better than knight. I'm not going to pull my bishop here so that way his knight is able to take my bishop. I'm going to put my bishop back to d3, guarding my pawn. Now his knight is looking ugly on the edge of the board. His king is still in the center of the board. But let him keep his king in the center of the board. Something is coming his way. I can't believe the guy just played d5. Like, he's helping me. The guy's 900, by the way. Like, I want you guys to look on this. He's 900. This king is in the center of the board, and he's allowing me and helping me to open the center. All I need to do here is to take on d5. Look at this. Look how vulnerable his e-pawn is going to be. He has to get checkmated. This is his last chance. to castle the king. And even if he castles the king, he's still gonna get checkmated. It's just over. Queen takes d5. This is just winning for me. Maybe he thinks I'm gonna take his queen, but the king is in the center. And my rook is on e1. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna play something called a par, where I'm gonna take on e5, check the king, hit the queen. He has to react to it, maybe by sacrificing his queen. Not sure, but I'm now just winning a queen. So if you decided to sack the queen, let's just take the queen, attacking the knight. His king is still in the center of the board. So I'm still going to be winning this game, checkmating his king. Where is he going to put his knight though? He pulls his knight back to d7, which is attacking my pawn on e5, but I'm going to hit him with pawn to e6. Hits the knight, hits the pawn. If he thinks he's winning a free pawn, that's not the idea. I wanted to weaken this diagonal pointing towards his king, which is why I'm going to play the move bishop to g6, checking the king, forcing the king to move, and I'm just going to be bringing the rest of my pieces in the game. So he moves his king to d8. Now let's just finally complete our development. Let's just go bishop to f4. My whole idea is to play rook to d1, apply pressure to his pinned knight. Well, my opponent resigns. What have we learned? Do not be moving your knights on the edge of the board. Don't be trading bishops for knights, and ensure that you castle your king. Now we're going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 1000 level. Stick around. Opponent is now 1000. He starts off by playing e4. Let's just play e5 here. And then he plays knight to f3. So here we're just going to play knight c6, developing our pieces, nothing too fancy. We're playing against an Italian game. And I'm going to be playing the two knights defense because we're not afraid of any fried liver attack. Knight c3 was played at the 1000 level. We already spoke about this. Knight c3 is a mistake. The best move in this position is pawn to d3. Let's just play knight takes e4. You know, we don't have to explain this. It happens so much in the speed run. Once the knight takes on e4, we're just going to play pawn to d5 and black basically equalize the position. So he took on e4. Let's play pawn to d5 here. It's now forcing the bishop to move. He decided to give up his bishop for a knight. That's not the recommended line though, because now once I takes, I'm attacking his knight. I also have the bishop here, which is good. He plays pawn to d3. And now I'm just going to continue with bishop to g4, developing my bishop, pinning his knight to the queen. And then my opponent decided to castle the king. Now, we are playing an Italian game. My idea is to play knight to d4 and apply pressure to the pinned knight. He is able to play knight back to d2, so it's not like it's losing. So I could also just castle my king. Well, let's play knight to e4. It's usually best to apply as much pressure to the opponent as possible. So I'm basically forcing him to find all the best move. So for example, if he does not find knight to d2, he's losing the game. He decided to play h3, which means he's just definitely losing in this position. And if you watched my Italian game videos, you know what we're going to be doing from here. We're going to be playing knight takes f3 check, forcing the pawn to take, and then our bishop is able to take because the pawn on g2 is no longer guarding the pawn on h3. So let's just take the knight. He has to take back, then we take, and we're attacking his rook. And we also know what the plan is from here. The overall plan is, how can we get a queen on the g2 square? I'm already thinking queen c6 followed by queen to g6, but I have to play with some level of principles. So let me just castle my king, get my king out of the center. And I'm also thinking of moves like pawn to f5 to chase away the knight. And, you know, you may still see queen c6 followed by queen g6. The reason why I'm not really so sure about playing this idea is because he is able to pull his knight back to g3 and block the check. But I am seeing a very nice idea that could possibly win me a piece. So I'm thinking of pawn to f5. If he moves the knight back to g3, then pawn to f4, and that's a fork. The thing is though, if I play pawn to f5, there is knight to g4, and my bishop is under attack. So I'm not going to play that move just yet. I'm actually going to play bishop e7, just ensuring that there's no piece that is able to get to the g5 square. Then I'll be able to play pawn to f5. Now, my opponent decided to play pawn c4. I mean, my plan was to play queen c6, followed by queen to g6 anyways. Taking on d3 is also a free pawn. But because the opponent's king is exposed, we're not necessarily trying to trade queens when we're going for the opponent's king. So let's just pull the queen back to c6. The goal is to play queen to g6. Not yet though, because if queen to g6, the knight blocks on g3, and it's not necessarily a checkmate, which is why I want to play pawn to f5, chasing away the knight, maybe to a random square. Then I'll hit him with queen to g6. And if the knight decides to go to g3, pawn to f4 will be a fork. So he decides to play knight to g4 anyways. We spoke about this. Once a piece gets to the g5 square, I just need to take. And once the bishop takes, I want you guys to notice how the bishop and the king is on the same line. So I'm still able to play the move queen to g6, even though the bishop is attacking my rook, because the bishop on g5 will be pinned. So let's simply take, and then once the bishop takes, we play the move queen to g6, pinning the bishop to the king. And the best he can do is try to protect the bishop, but it really won't work. White is just losing in this position. So queen to d2 was played, and I have a very nice move in this position. Now, keep in mind, if I'm able to play queen takes g5 and his queen is not there, then the king has to go to h1 or h2, and queen to g2 will be a checkmate. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do, well, I thought it was a removing the guard tactic. It is a removing the guard tactic, but it's not necessarily a sacrifice. I'm going to play rook takes d3. And my whole idea is to chase away the opponent's queen, and then once the queen moves away, I will be able to play queen takes g5. But it's not necessarily a sacrifice because my queen guards it. So he has to move his queen back to c1 to keep his bishop guarded. And then I'll be able to play moves like h6, putting pressure on the pin piece. I'm also thinking of rook takes pawn, maybe even doubling up my rook on the d file. A lot of ways to win this game. He plays pawn to f4. He decided to save the bishop and lose the queen. So let's just take the queen. It's now over, by the way, because after rook takes, it doesn't necessarily help, because all I'm going to do here is, well, I'm thinking of f6 to attack the rook, but I'm also thinking of queen h5. Yeah, queen h5 is a very strong move, because once I hit him with queen h5, I'm threatening both queen to g4 followed by queen g2 mate, and I'm also threatening queen to f3 followed by queen to g2 mate. So there's nothing that the opponent could do here to prevent a checkmate. So he pulls the rook back to e3. That will prolong the game a bit, but let's just play bishop to g4 here. My whole idea is to play bishop to f3 followed by queen to h1, and that will definitely be a checkmate. So maybe he's going to play rook to g3, but then I have bishop to f3 followed by queen to h1. Okay, pawn to f3 was played. That's a blunder. There is checkmate in two moves here. I want you to notice that once he moves this pawn to f3, it allows my rook to gain control over this h2 square, and my queen is also controlling the h2 square. So all I need to play is queen to h2 check. The king has to go to f1, and then queen to f2 is going to be a checkmate. So let's go queen to h2. The king has to go here, and that's a checkmate. What have we learned? If you're an Italian game player, please do not play knight c3 to protect the pawn. Just play pawn to d3 first. It's usually advised not to castle your king if your knight is being pinned to your queen, because it is just going to be too annoying. We're going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 1100 region. Stick around.
Our current is now 1100. We're still doing the same thing. Let's hit him with e4, but this one is playing the Scandinavian defense. Let's simply take the pawn on d5, but then he plays pawn c6. He's basically sacrificing material in order to gain development. So for example, if I take his pawn, his knight takes, she's gonna have a LinkedIn development. No, I could do that, but a one-time instructive game. So let's just play pawn to d4 here. Let's not be greedy. And then after this, we simply develop our pieces in the most normal way. So he develops his knight. Let's just develop our knight. And, don't mind if he takes the pawn. If he really wants to give me the pawn, then I'll take the pawn. But for now, I'm focusing on my development. I need to get all 4 of my minor pieces developed. For now, I only have 1 minor piece developed, so I don't want to be greedy and grabbing pawns. Remember, you don't want to be too materialistic when you're playing chess. He decided to take with the pawn, and I'm going to simply use the time to develop my bishop to g5. Now I have 2 out of 4 pieces developed, which means now I need to get 2 more pieces developed, and I need to get my king castled. he develops his knight, and then I'm going to play the move queen to d2. Now, this is an indication that I may castle on the queen side, but not yet. It's just a development move. I also want to play moves like knight f3 and bishop to d3. I haven't made the decision on exactly where I want to castle. My opponent plays the move pawn to g6 though, which means he may want to fianchetto his bishop and castle on the queen side. So, well, on the king side. So I'm going to castle on the queen side so that way it's easier for me to attack him. So let's play the move knight to f3 for now. Again, I could always castle whenever I want. My king is not in any real danger. So I just want him to castle his king as well. So he plays bishop to g7. Looks like he wants to castle on the next move. Let me use the time to castle my king. Now I have only one more piece that needs development, and then I'm going to start my attack. Now, bishop to g4 is a nice idea. You know, he's basically saying, okay, I'm pinning your bishop to the knight. You're not able to move your knight, or else you're going to lose your rook. So what I'm thinking of here is just to play a regular bishop to e2, so that way my pieces are no longer pinned. Let's go bishop to e2. Now my king is castled. All my minor pieces are developed. With that being said, it is time to start my attack. Who decides to castle his king? The first thing I'm going to do, however, is we're going to be using a principle called the principle of neutralization. What this does, it ensures that pieces that are on your half of the board are off your half of the board. So for example, because this bishop is on my half of the board, I'm already thinking about playing pawn to h3 or even knight e5. I think knight e5 is the better move, because if he takes and I takes, I hit the knight. If he takes, I takes, hit this knight, won this pawn. But the thing is, he does not have to take. So pawn to h3, I prefer pawn to h3 for now, forcing his bishop to move, and then I'm going to start a pawn storm on his king. Now, remember, once you're in the middle game, the goal is to start to plan. A lot of persons, they do not know how to plan. Remember, planning comes from looking on pawns and decide if you want to do pawn break or a pawn storm or target a weak pawn or a weak square in the opponent's position. So he made his first mistake, giving up a bishop for a knight. We know that we shouldn't be giving up bishops for a knight. Let's just take with the bishop. Now I have two pieces attacking this pawn. So he played pawn to e6. That was not a bad decision. Now, because our king is castled on opposite side, then it is better for me to do a pawn storm. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind that whenever you're attacking someone's king and they have a fianchetted bishop, it is very important that you exchange that fianchetted bishop, because the whole idea now is once I get rid of the dark squared bishop, it's gonna mean he has dark square weaknesses around his king because he plays pawn to g6, and then it's gonna be easier for me to target his king. For example, h4, h5 takes, and then that's gonna lead to a checkmate. Knight to a5 is an interesting move. He is putting his knight on the edge of the board, but he has a plan. He wants to put his knight on the c4 square, and that's dangerous. I don't think I want to allow his knight on the c4 square, because that's going to attack my queen. And then after he attacks my queen, he could put his queen on b6, certain checkmate on b2. So I'm thinking, do I need to defend against that? So here's what I'm thinking. I could simply take this bishop followed by pawn to h4, and if knight goes here, then I'm forced to move my queen. Or I could simply pull my bishop back to e2, preventing his knight from going to c4. If he puts his knight on c4, I'm just going to take his knight. Bishops are better than knights, so that would be good for him. But it will keep my plan alive of playing moves like pawn h4, pawn h5, using the pawn storm to create a pawn break and attack and checkmate his king. Whenever there's opposite side castles, it's usually going to be a very crazy game, which means I want to attack his king, he wants to attack my king. The faster attack usually wins. And to b6, okay, so he really wants to attack. He's targeting my b2 pawn, but again, the moment a knight goes on c4, I'm just going to take that knight. So I'm not too threatened. He could also play knight e4, but I will also take a knight if it goes on e4. I want you guys to keep in mind that I do not allow pieces on my half of the board, and any piece that is pointing towards my half of the board, I pay even more attention to them. So let's play pawn to h4 in this position with the idea of continuing my pawn storm. I want to play pawn to h5 as well. So he pulls his knight back to c6. That's an interesting move. I think he wants to win my pawn on d4. I think I don't mind if he wins the pawn on d4, but let's think about it. Let's say I play h5, he takes, I takes, he wins the pawn on d4, I takes, he takes. I'm not winning though. That's the thing. I'm not winning. Yeah, but my queen is gonna be so active. Let's play h5. Let's go for the attack. It's like you don't want to be wasting time playing defensive move if you're trying to attack, because the moment you play one equal to eight, then you're gonna be forced to play another defensive move. Like, and all of a sudden you have to abandon your attack and start focusing on the opponent's attack, and then you're no longer attack and now you're defending. And I don't like to play defensive chess. So if I have to lose material in order to make my attack successful, then that's a trade I will take any day. So he took on h6 with the same idea. Let's take on h6. And I guess he wants to play knight takes d4, winning a pawn. Now, my idea here is to try to open the h file and attack his king. Now, if I takes, he's going to play f takes. And I'm not necessarily seeing how I'm going to continue my attack, especially since he wants to get rid of this very strong bishop. But I have an idea. If I'm able to sacrifice my bishop on g6, then that has to lead to a checkmate. So instead of taking and then allowing him to take on e2, I'm going to play the move bishop to d3, applying more pressure to his g6 pawn. Now, my plan is to take on g6. If he takes, I sack my bishop, and then if he takes, queen takes g6 is going to be a checkmate. How is he going to defend against this? Not sure, because if he plays knight takes h5, I'll be able to sacrifice my rook on h5, and if the pawn takes, queen takes h7 is a checkmate. Knight to f5. That's a good defense. That's a good defense. Knight f5 attacks my queen. I definitely have to take this knight, so let's get rid of the knight. And he is first to take with his pawn. Now again, if I take here, he takes here, and I'm not able to take because his knight is guarding, but then I can play knight takes d5 or removing the guard tactic. And if his knight takes on d5, queen takes h7 becomes a checkmate. So let's take on g6. Once he takes back on g6, keep in mind, this knight is the only reason why queen takes h7 is a checkmate. Now in chess, we usually say the knight is overworked. If there's one piece doing more than one role, then the piece is overworked. So all I need to do is hit him with knight takes d5. I'm attacking his queen and I'm attacking the knight. If he takes my knight, then queen takes is a checkmate. So the best he could do, well, there's nothing he could do, because I thought he could pull his queen back to guard the mate, but my knight guards the square. So knight takes d5 is GG's. He's either going to lose his queen or he's going to be getting checkmated. Okay, so my opponent decided to take on f2. Now, how do we finish off this game? I'm thinking of taking on f6 with check. His rook then has to take, and then I take on h7 with check. His king is first to go to f8. Hit him with queen h8 check. His king's first to go to e7, and then I hit him with rook h7 check. That should win. Or I could simply take the knight followed by rook. Oh, he moves the king. Okay, that should make it a bit easier for me now. So in that case, he moves the king. How do we finish this off? If we check here, the king takes, and I do not have good follow-up checks. I'm not seeing the checkmate, so let's just take on h7, and I could safely say I'm ahead by a piece. Knight to g5 check is coming. This has to lead to a checkmate because rook d7 check is also coming. His queen has no checks on my king because my queen covers this diagonal. So he moves his rook to h8, and I'm thinking of playing knight g5 check. I'm also thinking of playing rook to d7. Now let's say we start with a rook to d7 check. He plays king to e6. Not sure what the follow-up is. Knight g5 check. If he plays king f6, then I should be able to play rook d6 check. But then he plays, okay, where's my checkmate? I'm not really seeing the checkmate, to be honest. Now, because I'm not seeing the checkmate, I'm just going to play the move rook h to e1, just covering these squares where it looks like his king is able to escape. So once I'm able to hit him with knight g5, if he puts his king here, rook to e6 could lead to a checkmate. So I'm just bringing as much pieces in the attack. It's very important that all your pieces participate in the attack. So he moves his queen back to c5. I think he's trying to protect this e7 square. Now, my checks are rook to d7 check. He's not able to cross here. He can't go here. He can't go here. So his king is going to be forced to go to g7, and then that's going to be a checkmate. Now, obviously, if you box with the queen, I'll take the queen, and it will also lead to a checkmate. So rook to d7 ends the game. The king has to go here, and that's a checkmate. What have we learned? There's no to really in the opening trying to grab pawns when you should be focusing on your development. When attacking the opponent's fianchetted bishop, it's very important to exchange the fianchetted bishop to create weaknesses around the opponent's king. Use pawn storms to open lines towards the opponent's king, and that's how your attack is going to be successful. Now we're going to be doing the same thing, but against someone at the 1200 level. Stick around. We're now playing against someone at the 1200 level. Let's start by playing pawn to e4, and then he plays pawn to e5. Now I'm just going to develop my knight, tap on. He develops his knight to guard it, which means we're playing an Italian game. Now, pawn to h6 was played. I do not recommend persons playing moves like pawn h6. Just play knight f6. Like, the fried liver attack is nothing to be worried about. Let me just continue with my development normally. Now I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. My next goal is to develop my last piece, get my king castled. He finally develops his knight. Let's play pawn to d3. And now I'm okay. So he develops his bishop. I'm now going to simply castle my king, getting my king out the center of the board. And what he needs to do here is play pawn to d6 or castle the king. It would be better for him to play pawn to d6. I would recommend to my students to delay castling if you're playing against an Italian game. And it does not mean not to cast, but just finish your development first. Now that you castle this game, I'm going to simply develop my last piece, bishop to e3. Now all my pieces are developed. My king is castled. This is the Italian game. And if he takes my bishop, I made a video called Plans and Ideas in the Italian Game, and this would be the top pawns in the center. And because he did not take, I'm not going to play the move queen to d2 with the idea of sacrificing my queen on h6. No, this is actually the idea. And okay, knight to g5 is just a good move because it basically prevents me from sacrificing on h6 because his knight covers the h6 square. But I guess I'm going to use the opportunity to play the double pawns in the center attack. So let's play knight to d5, which means he's now forced to take my bishop. Then I'll have the double pawns in the center. Now, usually once you have the double pawns in the center, the attack that you're going to be doing on the opponent's king is pretty straightforward. The goal is to get your queen to the g3 square, get your knight to the h4 square, get your knight to the f5 square, and attack the opponent's weak g7 pawn. So he pulls his knight back to e7, but yeah, that was just a mistake because if you notice, the knight on c6 was guarding the pawn on e5. Because he moves the knight, it's no longer guarding the pawn on e5. This is called a drawback blunder. A lot of persons blunder using this mistake. Let's just take the free pawn on e5. And just like that, I'm already ahead by a pawn. Now, he captured my knight on d5. I'm not going to take with the pawn, by the way, because it would block my bishop out. So I'm actually going to take with my bishop, and there's going to be something hitting him. I think, well, I am attacking the f7 pawn 3 times. He's only guarding the f7 pawn twice. And if he moves his queen to e7, knight to g6 is a walk on the queen and the rook. So he decided to put his queen on g5. That's not a bad move because if I take on f7, he's going to play bishop takes e3, and that's going to be winning my queen. Now, even if I play bishop takes f7 check, he simply needs to sacrifice his rook. So that's fine though. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to play the move pawn to d4. I am still attacking his f7 pawn 3 times. He is still guarding the f7 pawn twice. Pawn to d4, basically cutting off communication. Get to the bishop and he sacrificed his bishop. I think he thinks I have to take with the pawn, or I'm not able to take with the pawn because I'm going to lose my queen. But unfortunately, he missed that my queen is able to take his bishop. Now I'm just ahead by an entire piece. And now that he plays pawn to d6, attacking my knight, as we already discussed, I have 3 pieces attacking his f7 pawn. He only has 2 pieces guarding the f7 pawn. So now I'm just going to take on f7. I am attacking this queen, by the way. So I think the best thing for him to do is to sacrifice his rook, because if he moves his queen away, I'm going to move my knight away with a discovered attack because my bishop is on the same line as his king. So this is just GG's. He sacrificed his rook. let's just take with the same threat. My bishop is on the same line as his king. So if he does not move his king out the way, maybe to h7, which he found it, he would have been in trouble. No, this is the only piece that is not doing anything. That is a free pawn, by the way. And I want you guys to keep in mind, queen takes g7 is not a checkmate because his queen covers the square. So I'm thinking, can I try removing the guard tactic with pawn to h4? Because once I play pawn to h4, he's not able to take my pawn on h4 because I'm going to take his pawn on g7. The best he could do is pull his queen back to g6, maintaining the defense on his g7 pawn. Now, let me just use the time to get my last piece in the game. Let's play rook to f1. Now, every single piece is in the game. I'm just ahead by a rook. I knew he would have played bishop to h3. I'm not able to take the bishop due to the pin, and he is threatening checkmate. But there's so many ways to defend this checkmate. I like the idea of playing pawn to e5 though, because my bishop threatens the mate, and I am threatening to pull my bishop back to e4, which would pin his queen to his king, and that's because his queen and his king is on the same line. So let's play pawn to e5 in this position. If he takes, I'm just going to take with the threat of pinning his queen. So this is just winning for white. He plays pawn to c6. So he basically wants to chase away my bishop from guarding g2. But again, he missed that I'm just going to play bishop e4, pinning his queen to his king. He's also not able to pull his bishop back to f5 because I'm just going to take his bishop and he's still going to be pinned. So I think he's just going to resign. Well, he didn't resign. So let's just take the queen. He moves the king, queen to g6. He plays rook to f8, and this is just losing. I could either take the rook or I could simply take on g7, and that's just checkmate. What have we learned? When playing against the Italian game, it's best to delay your castling and develop your pieces first. After all your minor pieces are developed, then it's going to be a good time to castle. But now I'm going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 1300 level. So stick around. Our opponent is now 1300, but we're still going to be doing the same thing to win these games. He started off by playing e4. Let's just play e5. We put a pawn in the center of the board. As we said, we're going to be developing our pieces normally. He plays knight to f3, attacking my pawn. I'll play knight c6, guarding my pawn. And then he's playing pawn c8 opening. Now, against this opening, it's very important that we know what we're doing because a regular move like knight to f6, you could lose. Now, keep in mind that their knight is no longer able to get access to the c3 square. With that being said, we're going to play the move pawn to d5, immediately bursting open the center of the board because my opponent decided to play this weird pawn to c3 move. And then if this pawn decides to ever take, once my queen takes back, the knight won't be able to get to c3. So he took, let's take with the queen. My queen is out early, but the knight is not able to attack my queen. And this was already not the correct move. The better move was queen a4. So let's see how he decides to continue from here. Pawn to c4. Pawn c4 is not the ideal move. Yes, it attacks my queen, but I'm able to simply pull my queen back. And keep in mind, this is a very weak square on d4. And remember what I told you guys? A weakness is a pawn or a square that can't be guarded by another pawn. So for my opponent to be creating these weak squares this early on in the game, he's going to be in trouble. Now he plays pawn to d3. I want you to notice this is a back bishop because it is blocked out by its own pawns. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to continue with my development. Let's just get 2 out of 4 minor pieces developed. I'm not trying to be fancy or anything. He develops his bishop, kicking my knight to my queen, but that's nothing alarming. Let's just keep developing our pieces. Now we have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. All I want to do here, if my opponent does not decide to blunder, is to castle my king, develop my last piece, then I'm going to start my attack. Let's see how he responds. My opponent decided to play queen to e2. I do not like that move because, for one, you should not be moving your queen this early. You should be focusing on developing your bishop, developing your knight. The guy's 1300, by the way. Now, he is attacking my pawn on e5, so he has 2 attackers. I only have 1 defenders, but he's already breaking all the principles, so I'm not even going to guard my pawn. I'm just going to castle my king. And keep in mind, he is not able to touch my pawn because if he touches my pawn, I take the knight, the queen takes my knight, rook to e1, pinning his queen to his king. Now, keep in mind, my king is out the center. My opponent's king is still in the center. What should we do? we should open center. Knight to e2 was played. Now it looks like he's finally trying to get his king castled. I'm not seeing any way to punish him. So what I'm gonna do, just continue with my development. Now I have all four of my minor pieces developed. My king is castled. This is where things gets fun. The guy just decided to play pawn to h3. Yes, he's attacking my bishop. The question is, do we have to move that bishop? Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I want to play the move knight to d4 and apply pressure to his queen, and then he's not able to take my bishop because I attack his queen, but I'm not seeing that working. He's just going to move the queen. So I'm going to do what Maurice Ashley calls the grand posture exchange. And this is where you deliberately give up one of your bishops for the opponent's knight in order to gain some compensation. Now, I'm not necessarily immediately seeing the compensation that I have. I want to play pawn to e4 because, as we say, the goal is to open the center and attack the opponent's king. But if I play pawn to e4, that's just losing a pawn because my knight is pinned. So I'm going to play the move pawn to h6 here, which attacks his bishop, chasing away his bishop. And then if his bishop is no longer pinning my knight, then I'll be able to play pawn to e4 and open the center. So he decided to pull the bishop back to e3. Here's what I'm thinking. I could check, which is, I like that move. I could play knight e4. Also like that move. I could play e4. And I want you guys to notice, every single move that I'm considering me is where I'm putting a piece on the opponent's half of the board. Once you put a piece on the opponent's half of the board, it automatically qualifies as a good candidate move. So because a check is the most forcing move in chess, let's play bishop to b4 check. And what I'm thinking is, regardless of how he responds to the check, I'm going to play pawn to e4. Remember, when it comes to creating a plan, we have to go for pawn break. So if I'm able to just get rid of my e pawn, then I know there will be some attack coming his way. So I don't even care how he blocks it. If he blocks with the bishop, we don't care. My bishop is already being guarded by my knight. I'm going to play the move pawn to e4. Yes, I'm about to lose a pawn as king is in the center. His queen and the king is on the same line. His bishop is not yet developed. I could afford losing a pawn. But my friend, being at 1300, decided to blunder a piece. Now, or did he blunder a piece? No, he did. Thought he blundered a piece, but I thought I was able to take on f3, and then when he takes the pawn, I take bishop. But if I take on f3, he's able to play to e2, and then I check here, he moves the king, and then I'm not just completely winning. So does that mean I should just take here and attack? So I take, I take. I mean, it's obvious that I should take on f3. This is called an in-between move, by the way, where I'm going to first take on f3, which attacks his queen before I take his bishop. Now, he's not able to take back because then that would just be completely losing. He is able to play queen to d2 and guard his bishop. So he's not about to lose material, but this king is going to be stuck in the center of the board. And there is, come on, you're 1300, Johnny. Come on, Johnny, man. He missed it. He just missed it. That's just a free bishop. Do I take the bishop now, or do I play another in-between move and check his king? Let's go for it. Let's play rook to e8 check. We're not in any rush. I want you guys to keep in mind that whenever you see a good move, always look for a better one. Oh my, Johnny, look at this. Johnny thinks I'm going to play knight takes b4, but he decided to block the bishop. So what am I going to do? I'm going to play the move knight to d4, which PP on PP, and it attacks his queen. So now he's forced to move away his queen. He thought he was going to get a chance to castle, but I tell you, you do not castle your king against me. You keep your king in the center of the board. I'm going to open the center, and I'm going to attack your king. Now he's forced to move his king. I'm going to grab his bishop with my rook, and the attack is going to be brutal. Poor John. Poor John. Okay, so Johnny took on b7. I could check here and take this bishop. I could play rook takes, but what should you do whenever you find a good move? You should look for a better move. I'm not in any rush to beat Johnny. I'm going to play the move rook to b8, hitting the queen again. I want every single piece to be playing a role in the attack. Look at this. Every single move that I have is playing a role in the attack. I could fork Johnny here. I could take Johnny's bishop. If he moves his queen, I could grab this bishop. And then once I grab this bishop is still going to be pinned. So instead of being ahead by one piece, I'm going to be ahead by two pieces. And that's the reason why Johnny decided to sacrifice his queen. But am I going to take Johnny's queen? No, no, no. Because whenever you find a good move, you should look for a better one. So I'm going to first play an in-between move. Rook takes bishop, check. Now, Johnny's forced to react to the check. And then after he reacts to the check, that's when I'm going to take the queen. Now I'll take the queen. And from here, I'm ahead by what, 5 points? He plays pawn to a3 to guard his bishop. Okay, makes some sense. How do we finish off the game here? Now I'm thinking, if I'm able to get my queen here, that's a checkmate. That's a free pawn. Let's grab the free pawn because I'm trying to fork him here as well. He pulls the bishop back to b3. But that's not good, Johnny, because I'm just gonna check you here, bro. And once you take, I'm gonna check you here. The king is not able to move. You're gonna be forced to block with your bishop, and then I'm gonna take here. Your king is gonna be forced to move, and then you're gonna be checkmated. So let's give a check. Johnny has to take. Now we take with the queen. Johnny has to block with the bishop. Then I take this pawn. Johnny has to put his king here, and I want to give him something fancy because he's not resigning. Bring the king, queen here, hit the bishop. Let's just play queen. Let's just play queen to e2. We're attacking the unprotected bishop. He has to react to this move. I mean, maybe he's able to move his king to h2. Well, Johnny resigns. What have we learned? Don't be like Johnny. Please castle your king. Don't be moving the same pieces more than once. And don't play an opening if you don't know what you're doing. Just play regular chess. No, I'm going to be doing the same thing, but against someone at the 1400 level. Stick around. The opponent is now in the 1400 region. Let's hit him with e4. He plays e5. Now, I simply develop my knight and attack and spawn. He develops his knight to guard it, which means we're going to be playing the Italian game. So he's going for the tomb rats defense. I'm definitely not going to be trying the Friday River attack against someone at the 1400 level. And keep in mind, knight c3 is a mistake because they are able to sack the knight. So the best move is just to play pawn to d3, guard the pawn, and simply develop the pieces normally after. So he plays bishop to c5. We are in the Italian game. I'm wondering if I should play pawn c3 followed by pawn d4. I should just castle my king and play knight c3. Let's just play knight c3. This is going to be a regular Italian game with all the Italian game plans. But let's see if he knows what he's doing, because usually in the Italian game, I recommend persons to delay the castling, which he is done. He plays e6. And if someone is not castled, it's not really good to play bishop to g5. So let's just play one with pawn to h3 in this position. Like, I don't want him to play a move like bishop to g4, pinning my knight to my queen. So I'm just trying to prevent that. If I was playing with the black pieces, I would play bishop to e6. But then he plays knight to a5. Yo, that's a good move. That's a good move. That's a good move. This knight a5, it automatically traps the bishop, by the way. So my bishop is just not able to move. Now, because if I pull my bishop back, he's just going to take it. I'm just going to use the time to get my king out the center of the board. Now, what I could say is he is moving his knight 1, 2, 3 times to take my bishop that has only moved once. But bishops are better than knights, so he definitely has an argument there. Let's simply take back on d3. Now, if I was playing with the black pieces, I would play bishop e6 to attack the pawn. I would play h6. Oh, yeah, this guy knows something. He knows something about chess. He plays h6. Basically, he's trying to prevent my bishop from going to the g5 square. And now I think I just need to keep bringing as much pieces as I can in the game. Like, this is not going to be a walkover. So let's just play rook to e1, guarding my pawn. In the future, I could play knight to d5 and just plant my knight on the d4 square. I could also play knight to a4 if I want to trap his bishop as well. So maybe he needs to play a6. Now, he decides to play bishop to e6. He's applying some pressure to my pawn on c4. I'm thinking of doing queen to d3 to guard the pawn. I'm also thinking of just playing a move like knight to d5. But let's just go with queen to d3. I'm basically finishing my development. I only have one piece that needs development. He just needs to castle his king and his development is good. By the way, if you're seeing how black is playing this is exactly how you should be responding to the Italian game. So just copy this and you should be good. Now, how do I want to do this now? Do I just play bishop e3 and then get my rook in the game? or do I hit him with knight to a4? Knight to a4 will be annoying. If he pulls the bishop back, I grab it and then I develop my bishop. But I'm not going to be able to sacrifice on h6 anyways. So let's just play bishop to e3. Let's just focus on very quick development. Once he takes, I'm going to play rook takes. I'm going to swing my rook over to d1. And then eventually I want to lodge my knight on the d5 square. This guy's playing some chess, so I have to have some respect for him. He plays pawn to b6. That's an interesting move because his bishop could actually get trapped if he's not careful. But I don't want to trick him. That's the thing. Like, I could actually pull my bishop back and then try to play b4, and then his bishop is going to get trapped. But I don't want to trick him. Like, let's just follow some principles first. Like, if I'm in position, all my minor pieces are developed. My rook on a1 is the only piece that is not in the game. So let me get my rook in the game. Now, every single piece is in the game. I could continue with moves like knight to d5. And if I play knight to d5, I pull my bishop back and try to trap his bishop. But let's see. He's playing well, so I have to have some respect for him. So he plays bishop to d4. It's a nice move. Was basically preventing all my plans. Now if I play knight to d5, he's going to take. And he's threatening to take my knight. And if my queen takes, his knight takes on 4. So that's basically a removing the guard tactic. Now I have to be defending basically, but that's fine. Sometimes you have to play some defensive move. Let me pull my bishop back to d2, guarding against his bishop. Now if he takes, I'm just going to take and I'm fine. I still want to play moves like knight to d5, lodging my knight on that very strong d5 square. This is going to be like a very strategic win. I'm going to have to really dig in to win this game because black does not have any real weaknesses or targets at the moment. Knight to h5 was played. So he's basically trying to lodge his knight on this f4 square. Yo, this is someone that has watched my videos. That's not fair. I think he watched my videos. That's not fair. Okay, how are we going to work all the way around this? First of all, if I hit him with knight d5, he takes, my rook takes. His knight does not really get left 4 square because my knight is there. If he plays pawn to c6, however, he attacks my knight, which has to move, but then his d6 pawn is going to be unprotected. So let's go with this idea. So he basically has to trade bishops. It will be very embarrassing if he blunders his bishop because he's doing so well. But again, this is actually one of my students that I'm playing. So he always watches my videos. You know, we correspond a lot. So he knows exactly what he's doing. Again, if you play the Italian game, based on how black is playing, you can win a lot of games. I'm going to win this because I'm just better than him. Oh my God, bro. Come on. He was doing so well. Come on, Zeppo. That was just bad, bro. That was just bad. This video is going to be online for the rest of your life. And you just blundered your bishop. Wait, did he blunder his bishop? No, he didn't blunder his bishop. Yo, he didn't blunder his bishop. I think he blundered at least a pawn, though. He at least blundered a pawn. Because I could take stakes, and that's a free pawn. But I want to play pawn c3 and try to trap his bishop. That was actually my plan. Pawn c3, bishop c5, pawn b4, takes, hit the bishop. Oh, but then he's able to take... Yo, this guy's so strong. Maybe I'm going to pull pawn c3. Bishop goes back. Okay, here's what I'm just going to take the pawn. I can't win a piece. I'm going to win the pawn. I'm attacking his bishop twice. He's underguarding it once. Let's just take. Once his pawn takes, yes, I understand that I'm helping his rook to get an open file. But once my knight takes, my knight guards the pawn. Now, assuming he knows how to play chess, after I take this free pawn, I think he needs to play pawn to c5, chasing my knight away from a2, and then winning the pawn. Like, if he finds that move, then he knows what he's doing. Now, keep in mind, his knight also gets the f4 square. Yo, I think he should have played c5, though, because now I'm going to play... What am I going to play? Because I have to guard this. I don't want him to do this. So let's go queen to b3. Queen to b3. If he plays pawn to b5, which would be a very nice move, by the way, then I'll simply play knight to d5, so he's not really winning my c-pawn. But I want you guys to just notice how this knight on f4 is so strong. Like, if he plays pawn to f5, then he's just... No, actually, if he plays pawn to f5, then I'm able to take a free pawn on e5 because my rook is on the same line as the queen. So, yeah, that's a nice trick. That's a nice trick. He's actually doing well. He's doing very well. Let's see. Like, if he plays queen to yo, this guy's he's trying to sacrifice his bishop on h3, and then if I takes, he plays queen takes, and then he checkmates on g2. This is why I don't like to play against my students, because he blundered. You blundered, bro. We talked about this. He plays queen to d7. By the way, I think it would have been better for him to play queen to f6 and queen to g6 and then try to attack like this, because I'm already ahead by a pawn. Knight takes e5 is a free pawn because my rook is on the same line as his queen. So let's just grab the free pawn. If he takes, then I'm going to take his rook. So we caught him in a little trick, which is nice. Now we're ahead by 2 pawns. I mean, I really see he plays well in the opening. He played very well in the opening. Have to commend him for that. I don't like to play against my students though. It's like me playing against myself. It's kind of weird. So he pawns his queen back to d8. Poor guy. Now I'm just ahead by what? 2 pawns. But I think he's trying to play queen to g5 now. So I wanted to hit him with knight c6, but then he has queen g5. It's necessarily threatening a checkmate on g3. Well, he would be threatening a checkmate on g2. Okay, the queen is still pinned. Well, because the queen is still pinned, I'm not necessarily forced to move my knight. So what I'm thinking of is hitting with queen to g3. Attack the unprotected knight. If he takes, I'm going to take his queen. He is able to play queen to f6. Will he find queen f6? What should I play here? Let's go queen to g3. The knight is unprotected. The knight is on my half of the board. It's very important that you neutralize pieces on your half of the board anyway, so that's not bad. Knight to h5, I actually didn't think about knight to h5, but if he plays knight to h5, I have queen f3. Queen to f6, I think he needs to find. Now, if he finds queen to f6, what move am I going to play? Because I'm still worried about my a2 pawn. My knight is the only piece that is guarding it, but he's able to play c5. And then obviously he found queen to f6. Okay, let's say I hit him with knight d5. His knight takes, I takes, hit the bishop, he takes, I takes, and then his rook is going to be able to take my pawn. I'm ahead by 2 pawns here, so I just need to not blunder, and I'll be fine. I also want to fork on d7, but his bishop guards it. Knight to h5, I'm probably a bit afraid of. I definitely need to neutralize this knight, so I'm thinking knight d3. Knight d3, his knight takes, my pawn takes. No, knight d3, his knight takes, my queen takes. Oh, but then his queen takes here. Okay, I'm ahead by 2 pawns. Let's play a knight d5 he's gonna take, and my time is running out. Knight back to f3. Yeah, I think it's knight back to f3. Knight back to f3. If he does knight f5, my queen is not trapped because my queen gets the h4 square, so that's good. Oh, I thought his queen was not able to take because he loses the knight, but then he takes on b4. Yeah, that's very strong. If he plays queen takes b2, no, queen takes b2, I hit him with rip to b1. So queen takes b2 is actually a blunder. Please play queen takes b2. I think he needs to play pawn c5. Pawn c5, and then all my pawns over here is going to be in trouble. And then my time is also running out. So now I just need to play fast. I don't want to be too mean here. I have to give him back some material. So if he plays pawn c5, I have to quickly play knight e5, hit the queen. And then if he takes with the bishop, I take with the pawn, and then he takes on b2. Now his knight is hanging. Oh, but then he plays rook takes a2. Pawn to h5 is played instead. I think he wants to play h4, and then once I move, he takes on h4. Look, this guy's playing some chess. Okay, e5 takes. Let's just play e5 and attack his queen. We have to counter attack. Now, if I take here, he takes here, then my knight takes here, which means if he pushes, my queen gets the f3 c5. Okay, he pushes, my queen gets the f square. I'm fine. c5 is the only move that I'm afraid of right now, and I just need to find somewhere for my knight. Then he takes on f2. But you don't know how simple removing the guard, bro. Come on, man. We talked about this. Your rook is attacking a2. Just chase away my... he blended. He's trying to be fancy. But my knight guards the queen, bro. Let's just take on h3. He thinks he's winning a queen, but my knight guards it. What does he see? That does nothing. Let's just move the king. Yeah, he thinks he sees something. Maybe it's because my time is running out. He's aggressive. I talked to him about being aggressive as well, but nothing is wrong with being aggressive, by the way. But there's just no appetite from my king, and I'm just ahead by a piece here. I only have a minute on the clock. Maybe he's nervous. Maybe he thinks he has a chance to win on time. Poor guy. Now you're just gonna play him. Okay, so f6 was played. His bishop is now unprotected. So I just need to find a square for my knight. Let's say I hit him with knight to d3. Then his bishop is unprotected. My next move is gonna be rook to g1, by the way, and attack his queen. I don't really have a lot of time on the clock, so I need to play fast. But I think he thinks he's gonna finally beat me in a game. So he's gonna be playing so many bad moves now. Like, you don't want to have your nerves controlling you when you're playing chess, by the way, because that's one of my issues, which is why whenever I'm playing against grandmasters and I start to win, I get all jittery and then blunder the game because sometimes I get nervous and I'm sensing it from his moves. So he pulls the bishop back. Let's hit him with rook to g1, attacking his queen, putting my queen on the same line as his king. Now he has to move his queen, and I can now start some attack on his king under my head by like 4 points. So I'm just winning. Bishop h. Okay, we put this. Let's go here. Let's go here and move my queen. Now he has to move his queen. Oh, he missed that. That's a rook, buddy. Oh, but then he has 2 pieces for the rook. Yo, this guy's playing some chess. Let's give a check. I probably have to just flag him. He's playing some chess. See, he went this. This is a good game. This was a good, and then he blundered another. Poor guy. See, it sounds. What have we learned? Don't try to beat your coach. How Black played against the Italian game was a very good way to play against the Italian. My opponent missed a lot of removing the guard tactic on the queen side, but we're going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 1500 level. Stick around. Opponent is now in the 1500 level. Let's play e4. It's the same thing. We're going to be playing simple chess, developing our pieces. e5 was played. Let's play knight to f3, attacking his pawn. He plays knight c6, guarding the pawn, which means we're now in the Italian game. Now my opponent plays bishop to c5, and because I'm now playing higher rated opponent, this guy's 1600, by the way, but I'm actually going to play pawn to c3 here. And this is actually the more aggressive version of the Italian game. Things could get very, very aggressive in this position. He decided to play pawn to d6, and my whole idea of playing pawn to c3 was to play pawn to d4, and then after he takes, I take back, forcing his bishop to move. But now I have 2 very strong pawns in the center of the board. He plays bishop to b4 to check my king. I'm just going to play the move knight c3, developing my knight, guarding the check, and then he plays knight to f6. Now, he is applying some pressure to my pawn on e4, but I'm just going to castle my king here because his king is in the center of the board, so it will be in his best interest to get his king out the center of the board and not try to win any pawns. Okay, so he made his first mistake, by the way, which is giving up a bishop for a knight. It looks like he just wants to win a pawn, but that's not how chess works, bro. Let's just take the bishop. Let's see if the pawn is what he wants to win. Because if he's trying to win pawns with his king in the center of a board like that, then he definitely doesn't understand how chess works. Now, he plays knight takes. I'm going to play the move rook to e1, pinning his knight to the king. And then he plays this very interesting move, pawn to b5. He's basically saying, if I take his knight, he's going to take my rook. But that's not what my plan is. I wanted him to play pawn to b5 because now I'm able to hit him with bishop to a3. Now his king is never going to get castled. And then I'm going to attack his king. And if he dares to touch my bishop, he's going to lose his knight anyways. So he plays the move bishop to e6. That's an interesting move. And again, if he takes my bishop, I'll be able to take his knight. But I don't see the issue with simply moving my bishop out the way in this position. So I'm going to move my bishop to b5. Putting my bishop on b5 pins his knight to his king. And if he takes on c3, then I'm going to take on c6, attack his knight, then take on c6 again. Let's see what he does. Okay, so he plays pawn to a6. He's attacking my bishop. Now, if I pull my bishop back to a4, he's going to play b5 and, he's going to be attacking my bishop again. So I'm just going to use the time to get rid of his knight. And that way I'm able to keep the initiative. Now in this position, his king is still not able to get castled, and I want to continue my attack. So there's two moves I'm thinking of. First of all, his pawn on c6 is weak, so I like the idea of knight e5 attacking his pawn, and he actually does not have good ways to guard it. I also like the idea of queen a4. In fact, I love the idea of queen a4, because once I play queen a4, attacking this pawn, how is he gonna guard it? If he tries to play queen to d7, then I'm gonna hit him with knight e5, and I'll be attacking his queen, and I'll have two pieces attacking d6. If he pulls his bishop back to d7, then his knight is really gonna be pinned. So let's see how he responds to this. So he plays pawn to f6. Now, a move like pawn to f6 is played because he's trying to run his king to f7. But here's how I'm going to react to a move like this. First of all, that's a free pawn on c6. The threat is better than the execution, so I'm not in any rush to take. Because he plays pawn to f6, his bishop is now unprotected. If I take, his king goes here and guard the bishop. So I'm actually going to play the move knight to d2, allowing him to take my knight. Well, he wasn't able to take my knight because he would have lost his bishop. So he decided to play rook to b1. Now all I'm going to do is take his knight on e4. Again, the threat is better than the execution. I'm not going to take this pawn unless I know that I'm going to be winning material. So the question is, do I take on c6, king goes here, then take on e4? Or do I take on e4, attacking his pinned bishop? We take on e4. Now his bishop is pinned to the king. I think he still has to play king to f7. That's what he did. And now if I take on c6, I may be worried of bishop to d5. So let's play rook to e1. If you guys notice, all I'm doing is I'm trying to ensure that I'm playing with all my pieces. I don't want to just play with a few pieces. I don't want to just win a pawn and abandon the attack. I want to ensure that I'm always attacking. And if I'm going to take a pawn, I'm still attacking. So he plays rook to d8. It looks like he's trying to artificially castle. Now, I'm trying to take on c6. If his bishop goes here, I should be able to take his rook, and I will be ahead by a few pawns, but I don't like that scenario. So if I take here, bishop goes here, I check, rook takes, I check, queen takes, I check, queen blocks. Also don't like that scenario. Plus, he wants to put his king here. Well, if he puts his king here, I'll simply take his bishop. So let's play queen to a5. The purpose of queen to a5 is to swing my queen over to h5 and check his king, knowing that he's not able to simply move his king because he's going to be leaving his bishop unprotected. Actually, my back rank is weak. So if I take his bishop twice, I could be getting checkmated on the back rank. So I have to be a bit careful here. Rook to b5. That's a nice move. It basically prevents my queen from ever going over. But so I'll just take a free pawn. I'll just take a free pawn on e6. I'm now ahead by 2 pawns, by the way. And keep in mind, he is able to pull his king back to g8 because if I dare to take his bishop, his rook is going to come to b1 and simply checkmate my king. But I am now attacking his pawn on c6. So he still has to find a good reaction to this. So rook all the way to g5 was played. That's definitely a weird move. If I take, I'm now attacking his bishop. And if he moves his bishop to e5, I'll simply take his rook. And if he takes, I takes. And maybe he thinks he's winning a pawn, but I'll simply move my king to f1. So let's simply take another free pawn on c6. My bishop on a3 is not really doing much. So I may need to find a better square for my bishop. I'm currently threatening to simply win his bishop, by the way, so he has to be very careful. Maybe he plays bishop to d7, but I'll be able to go queen c4 and check his king. So he plays queen to d5. What's happening? First of all, his queen was guarding c7 and it's no longer guarding c7, so that's already a free pawn. If I take his queen like this, then that's just going to be a trade. So let's take the free pawn. I mean, it comes with check, so I'm not afraid of anything. He puts his king on g6. Now, if I take this pawn, his rook takes, and I will not be winning any material. Now, I also don't want to be getting checkmated on the back rank, so I'm actually going to play the move pawn to h4, attacking his rook. Now, after I attack his rook, I'm also thinking of a move like pawn c4, attacking his queen. In fact, pawn to c4 looks like it's winning material. Yo! He sacrificed his rook on g2. I was not expecting that move. Okay, let's just take. I mean, I have to take. I guess he wants to play f5 and apply some pressure to my pin, but What's the most he's gonna get from this? Like, let's say I play pawn to h5 check. If his king takes, I go here, I hit the queen. He's not able to take due to the pin. That's an idea. I also like the idea of just playing pawn c4. It attacks his queen, and if he takes, I takes, and he's losing material. Was not a good sacrifice. Let's just play pawn c4. He's now forced to move his queen. If he touches my rook, I take his queen. And if he moves his queen, I'll play d5. And if he takes my rook, I may take his bishop. So I'm still winning here. So he pulls his queen all the way back to a1. My rook is still pinned. I'm thinking of playing queen to g3 check, but that does not give me anything. He is attacking my unprotected bishop. I'm going to play the move pawn to d5. It breaks the pin of my rook. So if he takes my rook, I'm going to take back. And then if he takes my bishop, I'll take his bishop. But the position is going to be equal. I think that was bad. I think that was a bad move. Okay, I have another idea. If he takes my rook, I'm going to pull my bishop back to b2. Because then his bishop will be under attack. And I'll be attacking his pawn twice on g7. And his king is under attacks. His king is very weak. So I'm trying to find all the moves that attacks his king. So here's basically what's happening. If I take his bishop, he takes my bishop. So I'm going to play the move bishop back to b2. Threatening his pawn on g7. This could lead to a checkmate, by the way. And after he defends this pawn, then I'll take his bishop. So he pulls his bishop back to f7. Yo, that's actually not a nice move. He's about to get checkmated. First of all, we remember to find the best move. We look for the forcing move. These forcing moves are usually checks, right? The guy's king is so exposed. What is he going to do when I play queen to g3 check? If he moves his king here, that's a checkmate. If he puts his king here, it's a checkmate. If he puts his king here, that's also a checkmate. So queen back to g3 is just a checkmate. And queen to g3 check, it really doesn't matter where he puts his king. Queen to g5 will be a checkmate. He puts his king on f5, but that's just a checkmate. Now we're going to be doing the same thing against someone at the 1600 level. Stick around. Our opponent is now in the 1600 region. Same treatment. E pulls e4. Let's just play e5. Now, knight f3 attacks my pawn. I'll play knight c6 to defend the pawn, and we're playing against a Royal Lopez. Now, against the Spanish game, I like to just play a6, immediately putting the question to the bishop. He did not take the knight, so I'm just going to use the time to develop my knight, attack this pawn on e4. He castles the king, and it's definitely not a good idea to take this pawn because rook to e1 and I'm going to be in trouble. So let's just play b5 here, attacking the opponent's bishop. He pulls the bishop back. Now I'll play bishop c5, developing my bishop. And then he plays pawn to c3. Now the whole idea of this pawn to c3 is to play pawn to d4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the move pawn to d6. So that way, well, I thought he was going to play d4, but he plays h3 instead. h3 is to prevent my bishop from going to the g4 square. So that's a very nice move. Now, if he plays d4, I'm just going to take stakes, then move my bishop. In fact, I'm just going to move my bishop back to b6 now. So that way, if he plays d4, I don't have to take and I can simply play queen to e7. Now, rook to e1 was played, leaving f7 a bit weak, but he is guarding his pawn. Now, it's best if I just complete my development here. So let me get my king out the center of the board. I am now one move away from being fully developed. All I need to do is get this bishop out, and then my development will be complete. So pawn to d4 was played. I'm not interested in taking this pawn. Now, instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to play queen to e7 or rook to e8. So if they take my pawn, I'm able to take back. Now, bishop to g5 is definitely an annoying move, but if bishop g5, I should be able to play h6. So let's just start by playing rook to e8. I'm also applying some pressure to this pawn on e4. So in some variations, I could take on d4, then win this pawn. He develops his bishop to pin my knight. That's the idea. But now I'm just going to play h6. And he has to be careful here. He could be losing a pawn. For example, obviously, if he takes my knight, I'm just going to take back. But if he pulls his bishop back, I could play g5, which is very risky. But if he plays a regular, well, he pulls the bishop all the way back to c1. Yeah, that's weird. The guy just pinned my knight and then undeveloped his bishop. Guy's 1600, by the way. But aren't I just winning a pawn here? I want you guys to keep in mind how my rook is on the same line as this pawn on e4, and my knight is also attacking e4. So this is called an X-ray, by the way. I'm basically seeing through the pawn. So what I'm thinking is to take on d4, and then after he takes on d4, then I take on e4. Now, this may not work. This may not work because my knight on c6 is unprotected. So if I take on e4, bishop to d5, and that could be a fork. So I almost blundered. Now, instead, here's what I'm going to do. I'm still going to take it, by the way. But after he takes, I'm not going to take this free pawn just yet. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play bishop to b7, protecting my knight, developing all my pieces. So now that my development is complete, now I can start my attack. And I'm putting my bishop on the same line as this weak e4 pawn as well. So there's a lot of pieces targeting his pawn on e4. Pawn to e5 was played. That's a very aggressive move. Now, I'm definitely going to take. Why am I going to take is because I have a lead in development, which basically means I have more pieces developed than him. I mean, the guy literally undeveloped his bishop. So he basically has 2 pieces on the back rank. And if he doesn't move these 2 pieces, his rook is going to have problems joining the game. So let's take on e5. I could be potentially winning a pawn here or forcing him to undevelop his pieces. For example, after he takes, what I want to do is to take his queen. And then after his rook takes, I win a pawn. But after I takes, I think he's going to take with the bishop. But then he's going to be pulling all his pieces on the back rank, and I'm fine with that. So let's definitely take the queen. And I want you to keep in mind, to take is a mistake. So I'm going to take. It doesn't improve his position. Well, he took with the rook. That was bad. He decided to take with the rook. That's a bad move. This is called a drawback, by the way. If you notice, the rook no longer guards his pawn on e5. So once I takes, I'm not really seeing any tactics. If his knight takes, that's just a free pawn. However, I'm also thinking of playing the move knight to e4 because it does attack this weak f2 pawn. And obviously, whenever you see a good move, you want to look for a better one. So I'm thinking of knight e4 here. I just don't want to be too fancy and mess up the position. So I'm just checking to see if I'm missing anything. For example, if the bishop goes here, I'm fine. Yeah, let's play knight to e4. I prefer to play knight e4. Keep in mind, the threat is better than the execution. No, I did not take the free pawn, but I'm attacking another pawn, which means now he just has to lose a pawn because there's 2 pawns in his position that is hanging. So he decided to play bishop to e3, and this is very good for me because, again, remember, to take is a mistake. So anytime you're going to take something, ask yourself, am I improving my position or am I improving the opponent's position? If I take his bishop, I'm improving my position because once he takes, that's just a weak pawn. No, I'm going to take this free pawn. Wait, do I take the free pawn or do I play here first? Actually, let's just take the free pawn. If his knight takes, I take back. What I'm afraid of is his rook getting to my 7th rank. I think I underestimated that move, by the way. But let's see how he responds to this. So the knight takes, I have to take back, so let's not think for too long. Rook to d7 would be a very strong move because his bishop attacks f7 and his rook attacks c7. So that would be a double attack. How am I going to respond to this? Maybe knight back to d6 to guard my f7 pawn. So he did find rook to d7. Now, the good thing is, I do not think I'm in trouble because of his lack of development, basically. So what I'm going to do is I have to basically think about which one of the pawns I'm willing to lose. I'm thinking of, yeah, let's just play knight to d6 here because knight to d6 guards my pawn. It guards my bishop and my rook attacks this pawn. So he is able to take on c7, but my knight is going to be guarding my bishop. So I'm going to be safe enough to capture a free pawn on e3 with the idea of getting my rook to his 2nd rank and attacking this weak g2 pawn. Okay, so he took the pawn, and now I'm thinking, do I take this pawn or do I play rook to g5 and attack this pawn? Now, if rook to g5, he has to play pawn to g4, pawn to h5. I think he has rook to d7, bishop, pawn to h5, rook to d7. Okay, what do I do? Do I just take the... Let's just take the pawn. It's a free pawn. Let's just take the free pawn. I'm still ahead by a pawn. The fact that the rook is targeting my bishop is so uncomfortable because the knight, which is guarding the bishop, is an unprotected piece. So I think I need to neutralize this rook that is on my half of the board. So the best move I'm thinking of that he should play is knight c3 because knight c3 also prevents my rook from going to the e2 square. Yeah, he did find knight c3, and this is such an annoying rook. I think I'm just gonna play rook to c8. But even if I play rook to c8, he has rook to d7. Okay, what should we do here? Actually, let's play rook to g6. I like rook to g6. Rook to g3 actually, because I'm threatening to take his pawn with check. But then he's able to play knight d5, which is very nice. I don't think I'm going to be winning any material, but if I'm not able to lose material, then I'll be happy with that. Bishop to d5 was played. He guards the pawn. Now, if I take his knight, which is guarding his bishop, that's a removing the guard tactic. Now, if I take his knight and he decides to take my bishop, then I'll take his rook, and then he'll take my rook. But then I'll be ahead by a pawn, and I'll be able to get my rook to his second rank. So that's one variation. If I take his knight and he takes my, let's say he takes my rook and I takes, he's able to play rook to d7, and that's just a fork, so that may not work. Now, let's just take here. And then once his knight takes, yes, my knight is unprotected, but it is not being attacked. So I'm going to play the move rook to e8, putting my rook on the open file with the idea of putting my rook on his second rank. If you're able to get your rooks on the opponent's second rank or the 7th rank, basically you want to get your rooks where the pawn's born. Once you can get your rooks there, then you're going to be winning so many pawns and you're going to be winning the game, because there's also a lot of checkmating ideas there. Now, how is he going to defend this? Not sure. King f2, I should be able to check. Actually, he plays rook to e7. That's a nice idea. He doesn't want my rook to get there. So after takes, he has knight takes. What is stopping me from playing rook to d8 though? Because his knight is there. So I could take takes, knight here, hit this pawn. He moves knight here, but then he has king f2. So let's play the move rook to d8 in this position. I'm putting my rook on the same line as his knight, and now my plan is to move my knight out the way and get my rook to his second rank. Like, my whole plan here is to get my rook to his second rank. So he plays rook to e1. That's a nice move. Basically, if I play knight to f5, he checks, I takes, his rook takes, and then I'll be forced to play king to h7, and that's trading the pieces off the board. Now, I'm thinking of knight c4. I'm also thinking of playing a move like rook to d3, which will immediately attack his knight. But let's start by playing king to h7. If I play king to h7, it prevents him from playing rook to e8 with check, which means once I move my knight, his knight is going to be under attack. Rook to e3 here is a very nice move because it trades the rooks off the board. Now, keep in mind, I am ahead by a pawn, so all trades are still in my favor. Knight to c7. What's the purpose of that move? Not a hunt. Well, he's attacking my weak pawn. Now, if I put knight to f5 and attack his rook, he takes this pawn, but then I'll play knight h4. Oh, but then he has rook here. Knight f5, he takes, I play rook d2, he takes my knight, I takes, he moves the king, I check, he moves the king, I check, he moves the king, and then I go here. Yeah, that does not work. Oh, I do not have time. Let's play knight to f5. I do not have time. Now, rook takes f7 is the move. I want to get my rook here, but I just don't have enough time to do it. Knight here, he has rook here. So maybe after he takes, I'll play king to g6 and attack the rook. And then if he moves the rook, then I'll play rook to d2. That will be a better idea. He could also just pull this rook back to e2. That would be something. Now, we are in the end game, so the goal is to attack the pawns. So this is a pawn that I want to target. This is also a pawn that I want to target, which is why I'm trying to get my rook to d2. So if he pulls his rook here, I immediately put my, okay, he took, let's go here, attacking his rook, forcing him to react to this move. Would I just trap the guy's rook? Oh, he has knight e6. Knight e6 is a nice move. And if I take his rook, he takes my rook. But if he plays knight e6, I'm going to play rook to d2, which means his rook is still under attack and g2 is under attack. So I think he's in trouble now. Now he's in trouble. If he sack his rook, I'll just take. That should be an easy win. Knight e6, we play rook to d2, and now his rook is under attack and g2 is under attack. If he allows me to take on g2, that's actually a checkmate in 2 moves. So the best he could do here is sacrifice his rook. But before I take the rook, I'm going to take on g2 with check, forcing him to react to it. Then I'll take the rook, and my position is just completely winning. He moves his rook to a7. This is just a checkmate in 2 moves. I'm going to play rook takes g2 check. It really doesn't matter where he puts his king. If he puts his king here, knight to g3 is a checkmate. And if he puts his king here, knight to g3 is also a checkmate. So let's play rook to g3 check. The king has to go here or here. And that's just a checkmate. What have we learned? Don't develop your pieces just to undevelop your piece. Develop as quickly as possible. The threat is better than the execution. And in the end game, you should be attacking pawns. I'm going to be doing the same thing, but against someone at the 1700 level. Stick around. Opponent is now 1700. He started off by playing e4. Let's just play e5 here. And then he plays f4. This is called the King's Gambit. It's a very aggressive opening. But against the King's Gambit, we're not going to be going into all this drama. I recommend you play pawn to d5. And this is called the Fat Bear Counter Gambit, where you open the center of the board because of this weak king. And then my opponent decided to play pawn to d4. So basically, if I take the pawn, the queen takes, knight here hit the queen, takes, pawn takes, knight to b4, and then I'm attacking both of the pawns at the same time. So that's not a bad variation. I'm also thinking of just taking on e4, but if I take on e4, he should be able to take on e5 with his pawn. So let's bring this line. Let's take on d4. If he decides to take the queen, I'm playing with the black pieces, and I'll be able to develop my pieces and gain tempo on his queen. So he decided to develop his queen. Now I'll simply develop my knight and attack his queen at the same time. Taking on d5 is not really a good move. He decided to take on d5. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trade the queens. We're going to be approaching the endgame. My knight is under attack, but I'm going to be playing the move knight to b4. I'm attacking my pawn on d5, and I'm also threatening a fork on c2. So either way, I'm going to be regaining my pawn, but it's not just the pawn here. I want to be able to develop my pieces and still be able to attack him. He plays the move king to d1. That's a good sign. Well, for me. So his king is now not able to get castled. Yes, he's not in the endgame, but not being able to get castled is still a huge deal. Before I take the pawn, remember what I tell you guys, the threat is better than the execution. So before I simply take this pawn, I'm actually going to develop my bishop to f5. So I'm developing my pieces, and this is called the initiative. If you're able to develop your pieces and attack something at the same time, you're basically gaining tempo. And tempo in chess basically means time. And time in chess basically means the move. So I'm basically gaining free moves while I'm developing, and he has to defend my attack. Especially if he has to put his knight on the edge of the board. That would be bad. So he plays bishop to d3. This is bad. This is bad. Okay, again, still not going to take this pawn because I want to take on d3. Now, bishops are better than knights, but I am going to choose to keep my knight in this position. Right? Because I want to keep the initiative. Here's how I'm going to do it. First, I'm going to take his bishop. Once his pawn takes, I'm going to use my knight to take on d3, which means I still have the tempo. Why do I have the tempo? Because he is forced to react to the fact that I'm threatening a fork on f2. And once he defends against this, then my next move is going to be an attacking move. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to try to ensure that every move is an attacking move, so that way it's very uncomfortable for him to develop his pieces. He puts his knight on the edge of the board. It's not something that he wants to do, but he had to do it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my king out the center while I'm attacking his pawn on d5, and then my rook is on the same line as his king. So expect to see some tactical ideas here. He develops his knight to guard the pawn. That makes some sense, but I'm going to simply develop my knight to attack this pawn. So, and I'm also not seeing exactly how he's gonna defend that pawn. So if I'm able to win the pawn, then I'm just ahead by a pawn. King c2 was played, makes some sense. He's attacking my knight, but instead of just playing a passive knight move, which will give him the time, I'm going to play the move knight to b4 check. Again, the more I'm able to force him to react to my move, the better the initiative will be for me. So he moves his king to b3. Now we take the knight on d5, and just like that, we are ahead by a pawn. Now, we're in the endgame, so it's not going to be easy for us to attack his king. He just played the move knight to g5. It's still important for us to look on the opponent's last move, check to see what he's threatening. It's just a one-move threat, though. Don't play one-move threats, because yes, he's threatening a fork on f7. But all I need to do here is just play rook to d7. I guard the fork. Yes, the knight is on my half of the board, but my next move is going to be h6, which will be chasing his knight out of my half of the board, and then I'll simply continue my development and my endgame plan, which is to attack the pawns. Okay, so he decided to take my knight. We're definitely not going to take with the rook because I need to keep f7 guarded. So let's simply take with the knight in this position. And then he plays rook to e1. So he's basically trying to develop his own initiative. Notice how he's trying to ensure that his moves are attacking move. But if you can solve your problems while following principles, then you're not necessarily defending. So for example, yes, he's threatening e8, but what if I just develop my bishop to d6? Not only do I guard the threat of rook to e8 check, but I also develop my bishop and attack his pawn on f4. So I basically switch around the defense. Now he's the one who is forced to defend, which he did defend the pawn on f4, and more I'll simply play h6, chasing his knight out of my half of the board. I'm ahead by a pawn, so my plan from here is just to trade as much pieces off the board. So he pulls his knight back to e4. Now I'm ahead by a pawn, so I want to trade. So in this position, I actually don't mind if his knight takes my bishop. So I'm just going to use the time to get my last piece in the game. Now, all my pieces are literally in the center of the board. This is how you want to be playing the endgame, by the way. Like, if you want to be a good endgame player, you have to ensure that you know how to coordinate your pieces and how to ensure that you know how to use all your pieces and give them the same rule. So for example, he takes, I takes, notice all my pieces is doing the same role, trying to control the center of the board. He plays bishop to d2. His bishop is unprotected. And I have a very nice idea here. This is a very nice idea. The average brain may not comprehend it, but I want to mirror myself to have a very strong knight on the e4 square. So I'm thinking about playing f5, knight f6, knight e4. I'm also thinking of just the regular knight f6, but he's just going to move the bishop. So let's start by playing pawn to f5. This is basically securing an outpost on e4. I think he may try bishop c3, but my knight covers the square, so I'm doing fine. Rook to c1, he's getting his pieces on open files. Let's just play knight back to f6. That was the plan. I'm now attacking his bishop, and my whole idea is to plant my knight on this very strong e4 square. Okay, his rook is on my 7th rank. That's very strong. His bishop is hanging though. Now the issue is, if I take his hanging bishop, he's going to play rook check. And once I move my king, that's going to be a draw. So I just cannot allow this. So let's play the move rook to d7, defending against this threat. His bishop is still under attack. And because I'm ahead by a pawn, all trades are good for me anyway. So he has to trade the rooks, and then I'll be fine. So he took my rook on d7. The question is, do I take with the rook or the king? If I take with the king, he plays bishop c3, and I'm not able to move my knight because I'm going to lose a pawn. But I am able to pin, but then he's going to check. I think I have to take with the rook here. So that way, if he still decides to play bishop c3, I'm able to move my knight. Well, he pulls the king back. I'll still put my knight on the e4 square, and then his bishop is not able to get to the c3 square. So this is just very, very good for me. Now, keep in mind, because I'm ahead by a pawn, every trade, not pawn trades, don't be trading pawns if you're ahead by a pawn. You should be trading pieces. But every piece trade that I do in the endgame is going to be benefiting me. So, for example, he plays bishop to c3. My knight is clearly better than his bishop, by the way, because this is a very strong knight. But I'm going to go for the trade because I'm ahead in material. Now, this may be a hard endgame to win for the average person, but it's a very simple plan. What I want to do is I want to advance my pawn majority. I have 3 pawns versus 2 pawns. So this is where I'm going to be creating my pass pawn. And I need to get my king in the game. So let's start by playing pawn to c6, not pawn to c5, because again, you want to ensure all your pieces are working together. So I want to get my king in the game first, put my rook on the most active square. Remember, in the end game, it's very important that you're patient in the end game. You don't want to be rushing. Rook to d1 is a very nice move. He wants to put his rook right here. So let's just play king to c7. If he attacks my pawn, I'll simply guard it and I'll be fine. You have to be patient in the endgame. I'm not thinking of winning the game right now. My whole objective is just to not lose my pawn. So he puts his rook there. I could go here. If he takes, yeah, let's go here first. I think he needs to check, and then I'm going to block the check. And if he goes back, then I play g6. And that's another thing that you guys want to keep in mind. If you're winning a game, any scenario that you get to repeat the position once or even twice, you should repeat the position. Don't repeat the position 3 times though, because then it will be a draw. And this is what happens when you just take the chance of repeating the position. This is now just literally losing because I'm ahead by a pawn in a king and pawn ending. This is the whole idea why you want to be trading pieces when you're ahead in material. He's attacking my pawn. I'm going to simply defend my pawn. And basically what is going to happen here is he's going to be in something that is called a zugzwang. And a zugzwang basically means he has no good moves, even though it is his turn to play. So he pushes pawn. I'm thinking of playing pawn push. I have to be very careful here. I have to really calculate what I'm doing. So I'm thinking of playing pawn push, and then he only has one pawn move there. And then I play pawn push, and then he only has one pawn move. And then I play pawn push, and then he plays one pawn move. Now the issue is he is able to move away his king. And once he moves his king, it's going to be a bit difficult for me. So let's just start by playing b6 for now, just in case I need to prevent his king from going to the c5 square, because his king will be able to get to the e5 square if I put my king here. Okay, pawn to b5. That's a very nice move. Now I'm thinking of g4. Takes, push, push. And then if he takes, I takes. Yeah, let's play g5 here. Now if he takes, I takes. My plan is to create a pass pawn. He took. Let's take. Now, maybe he thinks he's able to play h5, which would be the right plan, because, you know, if you're winning, you want to create outside pass pawns. But we are usually able to meet moves like h5 with moves like f4. So he decided to play h3. Now, because he plays h3, now I'm able to just move my king to e6. And this was the whole idea of playing b6. His king is now not able to get to c5. So I'm just going to wait until he runs out of pawn moves, actually. And pulling his king back to e3 makes it way easier for me because it allows me to get what is called entry into his position with a move like king to e5. Now I'm going to be able to advance my pass pawn even further, and pawn to f4 will be creating another pass pawn. So this is now just completely losing. Pawn to h5 is a good try. I could take then push, but let's just play pawn to f4 check. He has to react to this check, and I just have too many pawns. Best he could do is move his king, but I'll just take the pawn. I'm doing fine. So he moves the king. If I take this pawn and then he takes this pawn, I move the king and I'm winning. If I takes and then he takes, I just need to push. If he push, I push. If he push, I prevent the pawn from queening and I'm also winning. So let's just take here. If he takes, then that's just an outside pass pawn. If you allow your opponent to have pass pawns on the outside, then it's going to be a harder game for you to defend. So taking on f4 is not even something that he should think of. And I want you guys to notice, as I'm climbing up the level, I noticed that my end game is just better than these guys. And I actually came to the Bahamas for a chess tournament, and it's the same thing. I was doing well against the Grandmasters, but the moment I go into the end game, they just outclass me. So if you want to be good at chess, your end game needs to be on point. He took. We know what to do in the end game. Pass pawns must be pushed. So let's push the pass pawn. If he pushes, my king is still in the square. So I'm not in any rush to take that pawn. So if he pushes, I'm going to push and I'm just winning. So he plays h5. Again, this is how we tell if our king is in the square. Our king is in the square. No need to rush. Let's push our pass pawn. We have two pass pawn. He only has one. Now that he pushed, we have to be careful. This is our only chance to step in the square. So once I play king f6, I step into the square. Yes, I'm leaving my pawn unprotected, but he's not able to touch it because if he touch this pawn, his king is going to step out of the square of this pawn, and then I'll be completely winning. He pushes the pawn, king to g7. Now I'm going to be ahead by 2 pawns. I'm expecting resignation. Let's just take the queen. If he ever takes, I'm just going to push. So if he pulls his king back, I'm just going to use the time to get my king in the game. Let's just get the king in the game. Now once he puts his king here, I'm able to push this pawn because if he let me show you guys because my time is running out. I push this pawn. If he attacks this pawn, I push this one. If he attacks this pawn, I push this one. This is actually a very, very important idea for you guys to know on how to promote your pawns when you have 2 pass pawns up the board like this. So he attacks this pawn, I push this one. Once he takes this pawn, this becomes a queen. He took the pawn, now we simply queen, and then we're going to deliver the checkmate. Let's just take the pawn. Well, he moves the king. Now let's just play king to it, queen a4. we're just delivering the checkmate here. We're at 1700, so I'm assuming you guys know how to deliver a checkmate. I'm just getting my king in the game. He moves the pawn. Let's just keep getting the king in the game. Let's get the king in the game. Not sure why this guy's not resigning. Get the king in the game. Maybe he thinks I'm going to stalemate or something. King here, we play here, and now it's going to be checkmate in like 2 moves. Yeah, it's mate in 2 here. He finally resigns. What have we learned? In the end game, it's very important to develop your pieces with tempo on the opponents. It's very important to develop your pieces and attack at the same time. So it's also important for you to trade as much pieces as you can once you're ahead in material, so you can bring the game to an end game. And then once you're in that end game, the goal is to start attacking the opponent's pawns. In the end game, creating pass pawns by using pawn breaks is very, very important. Now I'm going to be showing you guys how to do the same thing, but at the 1800 level. Do stick around. So my opponent is in the 1800 level. He plays e4. Let's just play e5 here. We're going to be doing the same thing, regular development. He develops his knight to attack my pawn. I'll simply develop my knight, guarding my pawn. But then he's playing the Royal Lopez, which is a very aggressive way to play against knight c6. But once they put their bishop here, I'm just going to play a6, chasing away that bishop. He pulls the bishop back to a4, and then I'm going to use the time to simply develop my knight, applying some pressure to this pawn on e4. He castles his king. I need to quickly get my king out the center of the board. But first I'm going to play this move, pawn to b5, chasing away his bishop again. And then once he moves his bishop, I'm going to play the move bishop to c5. And from here, I'm just trying to complete my development so that way I can quickly castle my king. So he plays pawn to h3. Very important move because he basically does not want my knight or my bishop going to the g4 square. Let me just use the time to castle my king. And he plays rook to e1, which is guarding his pawn on e4. So from here, I only have one piece that needs to be developed, and that's my bishop on c8. So I'm just going to play the move pawn to d6. The purpose of d6 is not only to guard my pawn or develop my bishop, but I wanted to play knight a5 and attack the opponent's bishop, which is why he played pawn c3, because now he wants to play d4 and attack my bishop. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply play the move rook to e8, applying some pressure to this pawn on e4, which means if he plays d4 and I take, I'll be able to take this pawn on e4. So he plays pawn to a4. That's a nice move because if I take, it's going to help his bishop to get a better diagonal. And keep in mind, to take is a mistake. You should only trade when it improves your position. So I'm not going to be taking that pawn. Instead, I'm going to be playing the move pawn to b4, keeping the file closed, ensuring that his rook or his bishop does not enjoy those open lines. Now, once he plays pawn to d4, my bishop is now under attack. Now, here's what I'm thinking. I could take the pawn, and then after he takes back, I pull my bishop back. Or I could just pull my bishop back in one move without helping his structure in any way. So let me just pull my bishop back to a7. If he wants to take, that's on him. I'll just take back. But pawn to d5 is actually a very annoying move here. But he did not play. So basically, he decided to pin my knight to my queen. So what I'm going to do in this position is I'm going to play the move rook to b8, guarding my pawn on b4. And it also applies some pressure to his bishop. So for example, if I manage to take on c3 and his queen is no longer guarding his bishop, then I'll simply win a bishop. So he has to be careful. Okay. So he decided to play bishop to b5. That's a very nice move. It is attacking my knight. My knight is not able to take his bishop due to this pin. So what will I do here? I mean, I don't see the issue with just playing bishop to d7, guarding my knight. Let's just play bishop to d7, guarding the knight. If he wants to give up a bishop for a knight, that's on him. Well, he did decided to give up the bishop for the knight. Let's just take here. And then he plays pawn to b5. Now, the good thing is, after giving up the bishop for the knight, he decided to close the position. So that's not too bad. Now, what I'm noticing is my bishop is definitely enjoying this very long diagonal. But since my bishop is under attack, let me pull it back to d7 first. And then he pulls his knight back to h2. What's his plan? First of all, there's a bishop in my half of the board. There's a principle in chess that is called the principle of neutralization. And it basically states if there is a piece on your half of the board, it's very important that you chase that piece out. So I'm thinking of playing the move pawn to h6. I also like the idea of taking here, and then after he takes, play rook to b2. But let's just play the move pawn to h6 first, getting rid of the bishop from my half of the board. And obviously, it will be bad for him to give up a bishop for a knight, but okay, so he pulls his bishop back to h4. Very interesting decision. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take on c3. And to take is a mistake, but this doesn't help the opponent because if he takes with the knight, I take and I want a pawn. So he decided to take with his pawn, which means his knight is still undeveloped. And because we're in the middle game, it's time to start thinking of planning and pawn breaks. So I'm actually going to play the move pawn to c6 in this position. Now what this does, it opens this diagonal for my queen. If he takes, then I take back and my bishop is doing fine. Instead, he decided to play pawn to c4, but now I'm just going to take on d5, and it opens this line for if I want to put a rook there or something. Now, what I'm thinking of here is bishop to d4 and attack his rook, but I guess he's just going to play rook to a2, and I get nothing from that attacking move. I want to play something like queen to b6 though, and apply some pressure to f2. And if he dares to take my knight, then I'll simply take on f2. And that would be a very nice idea. So let's just play queen to b6. I'm also getting out of this annoying pin, which is good. And I was not forced to move the pawn in front of my king. So let's see how he responds to this. He develops his knight to d2. That's not a bad move. His bishop guards the f2 pawn, so I'm not able to win any material here. And okay, now he's actually threatening to just take my knight and double up my pawns. So I'm going to pull my knight back to h7 so that way I do not have any double pawns. And from here, I'm thinking of moves like f5. Well, he plays a5, which is attacking my queen. So I have to be careful. But whenever you're trying to find squares to put your pieces, you always want to find the most forward moves that you can possibly play. So I'm thinking of queen to b2, but then he has knight c4, which will attack my queen. So I'm going to simply play the move queen to c5 in this position, keeping an eye on this pawn on a5. So that way, if he plays rook to c1, I take the pawn. Knight b3 attacks my queen, but I'm not afraid of that because I'm just going to play something like queen to c3 and I'm fine. So he decided to play the move queen to f3. It leaves his knight unprotected, but I'm not able to punish him for doing this just yet. None of my pieces are in any great danger. My rook is not doing anything, so I'm thinking of just playing the move rook to b2. It attacks his knight. It applies some pressure to f2. And I'm thinking of playing moves like knight to g4 in the future, which will attack his queen. So he moves his rook to c1, not moving his knight. He decided to play a counter-attack and counter-attack my queen. But let's just play queen. Where do I put the queen? Do I go queen b5 or queen b4? If queen here, he goes knight here. Let's go queen to d4. Because if he still decides to put his knight here, then queen to b4 and he's forced to move the knight. I'm basically trying to keep my queen on this diagonal so that way in the future I could try to take on f2. He pulls his knight back to f2. And that's when I'm going to hit him with the move knight to g5. Now, keep in mind, I am attacking his queen and I'm attacking this pawn on e4. So if he is forced to move his queen, then I'm going to be taking on e4 and I'm going to be winning a pawn. But if his bishop takes my knight, then my rook takes on f2. And then I'm going to be winning more than just a queen in that position. So let's see how he responds to this. So he plays the move queen to e3. That's not a bad defense. Because basically, if I move my queen anywhere, he's going to simply take my bishop. But what is preventing me from simply taking this free pawn? I mean, I could take his knight first, then take the pawn, but that's just a free pawn. Let's just take the free pawn. I'm not just ahead by a pawn, but I don't really have a lot of time on my clock, so I have to play a bit fast here. So he took the queen on d4. Let's just take back. My rook is on the same diagonal as his rook, so he has to be careful. We're now in the endgame, by the way, guys. Remember what we do in the endgame. We attack pawns. That's how the endgame works. It's no longer about, okay, we need to checkmate the opponent's king. Nah, you target the pawns and attack the pawns. So my opponent decided to play knight to g4, and that already looks like a mistake because now my target is this f2 pawn. I have 1, 2, 3 pieces targeting his f2 pawns. He has 1, f2, 3 pieces guarding the f2 pawn, which means if I take on g4 and he takes back, that's just a removing the guard tactic. So let's just take on g4. Once he takes back, I'll take on f2, and that's another free pawn. Unless I want to get tricky and win even more material with g5, forcing the bishop to take his bishop. Pawn is no longer able to take. Knight has to take on f2, king goes here, takes, and then I'm still ahead. Well, I do not have enough time on the clock, so let's go for it. Pawn to g5, bishop has to move, take the bishop. Oh boy, he did not move the bishop. He thought this was attacking my bishop. But that's not attacking my bishop, bro. My bishop is guarded. That's just a free bishop. Or maybe he thought if he pulled his bishop back, he was losing, and then he sacrificed his rook. Again, maybe he thought he was winning material. Or maybe he's just trying to win on time. He's not going to win on time, though. I'm just ahead by 6 points. The best he could do in this position is resign. Like, knight c3 followed by knight e2 is coming, and that's going to win even more material. Okay, pawn to f3 does not help. Let's just play knight to g3 in this position. My whole idea is to trade pieces off the board, and once I get both of my rooks on his second rank, then it's definitely going to be GG's. Well, my opponent resigns. What have we learned? We learned about removing the guard, and we learned about planning in chess has a lot to do with pawn breaks. I'm going to be doing the same thing, but against someone at the 1900 level. Stick around. Opponent is now in the 1900 region. Let's hit him with e5. We're just going to be developing our pieces. He plays knight to f6. I have been playing a lot of knight c6, so let's just play the Petrov's defense. Now, this could be a very aggressive way to play, or sometimes it gets a bit drawish. She plays knight takes e5. I'm going to play pawn to d6, chasing away the opponent's knight first. Then I take this pawn on e4. Now, after pawn to d4, here we just need to play pawn to d5. Everything I just explained is theory, by the way. He developed his bishop, applying some pressure to my knight. I'm just going to develop my bishop with the intention of just castling my king on the next move. So he castled his king. I'll also castle my king. We're both playing principal chess so far. My knight is on his half of the board. It could be a strength or a weakness, depending on what my opponent plays. Now, being at 1900, my opponent is not going to just make a horrible blunder. You know, for example, he just played rook to e1. It's very important that we look on the opponent's last move, check to see what the opponent's last move is doing. The rook is attacking my knight. The bishop is attacking my knight. I only have one defender on the knight, so I'm going to play the move rook to e8, covering my knight. Now, after pawn to c4, in this position, he's basically threatening my pawn in the center. And the thing is, if I take his pawn on c4, he's going to take my knight on e4 because my pawn will no longer be guarding the knight. So I'm going to play the move pawn to c6, guarding my pawn on d5. So if he takes on d5, I take back on d5, and then I'm doing fine. Okay, so the opponent decided to play knight to c3. So he has 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking my knight. I'm thinking of playing bishop to f5 in this position, so that way I also have 3 pieces guarding my knight. I'm also thinking of just taking his knight on c3, and then if he takes my rook, I take back. If he takes, I takes, and then I just develop my pieces normally. The issue with my position is if I go to f5, he's able to take on a5 and then take on e5 with the knight. So I may have to liquidate the position here. So he didn't take on c3. He took back on c3. Now, if I take his rook, I'm basically helping his queen to get an open file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on c4. And maybe you're saying I'm just helping his bishop, but now his bishop is no longer controlling this diagonal. So my bishop is able to go to f5 and control this diagonal. Bishop to g4 was also a very nice move, by the way. So maybe I should have even played bishop to g4. But all I need to do from this position is to move my knight, move my queen, and then my development would be complete. Now, bishop to g5, that's a very nice move because keep in mind, the bishop is attacking my queen. And if I move my queen to the c7 square, it will leave my rook unprotected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take on e1 first, checking the king. Then once the queen takes, then I'll be free to move my queen. The thing is, though, if I move my queen to c7, his queen is still gonna go on e8. So I think I have to put my queen on the c8 square. So, this guy's playing very well. My plan is to play knight to d7 to just finally complete my development. I'm thinking of knight e5. That would be a very annoying move, but I'm just going to play bishop to e6. I think I have to play a series of defensive move in this position, but after I manage to complete my development, then that's where the real chess begins. So he would play knight to e5. Basically what he's doing, he's just ensuring that every single move that he plays, he attacks my position so that way I'm not able to complete my development. But he has two pieces attacking my f7 pawn. So let me just pull my bishop back to e6, guarding my f7 pawn. If his bishop takes, then my queen simply takes. My next move is to develop my knight, and then I'll have a very solid position. So he decided to play queen to e3. That's not a bad move. The thing is, let's say I take his bishop, then his knight takes my bishop and he's attacking my bishop. And if I try to put my knight on d7, then my queen will no longer be guarding my bishop. And then once he takes and I take back, I have what is called a weak pawn. Now, what I am thinking about is to take his knight on e5, because if he takes back with the pawn or the queen, I take his bishop and that's a free piece. So this is like a removing the guard tactic. However, he has an in-between move. Basically, if I take his knight, he's going to first take my bishop. And if I take his bishop, then he's going to take back. And then I may play knight d7 and attack his pawn on e5. Now, another line that I'm thinking of is to take his knight. When he takes my queen, I take on h2 first. So basically, I play an in-between move, in between his in-between move. And then after he takes on h2, then I take his bishop, attacking his queen. Now, if he moves away the queen, it will give me time to finish my development. But if he decides to trade the queens off the board, I will be in the endgame with an extra pawn. So I think I'm going to choose this variation because it's the most promising one. So he played the in-between move. If I take, he's going to take. So I'm going to play the in-between move, in between his in-between move. And now he basically has to react to the check. After he reacts to the check, that's when I'm going to take his bishop. And then I'm going to be ahead by a pawn, but I'm going to be massively behind in development. Like if I don't manage to take out my knight and my rook quick enough, then I could actually be losing the game, even though I have more material. So for example, after king takes, let's say I take, I think if he plays rook to e1, he's in very, very good shape. He didn't play rook to e1 though, so let's just take. And again, I am behind the development, but we are in the end game. It's a completely different ballgame in the end game. Now that we're in the end game, I want to ensure that I teach you guys how to be thinking effectively in the end game. So once you get to the end game, I want you guys to be thinking about pawns. You can't really checkmate the opponent's king in the endgame, so attack pawns in the endgame, or push past pawns in the endgame, or activate your king in the endgame. So for example, his last move was attacking my pawn. I'm going to play king to f7, defending my pawn. So if the move that you're playing in the endgame does not attack a weak pawn, push a past pawn, activate your king, or, just trying to put active squares and put them towards the center of the board, then that's not going to be a good move. I'm not going to lie though. This is not what you want to see when you're playing chess. You want to see your pieces. But my opponent was basically not giving me a chance to finish my development. But I am ahead by a pawn. So if he plays another move that doesn't directly attack something, for example, king to g3, then I'm just going to finish my development. Now, him playing king to g3 is activating his king. So it's not a terrible move. But let me use the time to get my knight in the game. I also want to get my rook in the game. Maybe play pawn to e5 to get rid of my weak pawn. And then I'm going to be just ahead by a pawn. Because if I'm ahead by a pawn, the whole idea in order to win this game is to actually trade the pieces off board. Not necessarily the pawns. If you trade one pawn or two pawns, then it's fine. But ultimately, you want to trade pieces for when you're ahead in material. Okay, he pulls his bishop all the way back to c1. I cannot say I understand what he's doing, but I think he wants to play f4, which will prevent me from playing e5, and then he just doesn't want to keep his bishop on g5. No, if that's his idea, then that's a decent idea. I need to get my rook in the game. If I play rook to e8 and he plays pawn to f4, then that's not necessarily good for me. So I'm thinking of playing pawn to c5, and instead of trying to open the e file, I simply open the c file. So let's play pawn to c5 here. Again, the goal in the end game is not necessarily to trade pawns, because if we trade all the pawns off the board, then I'm going to just be left with one pawn, and then he's going to sacrifice the bishop for the pawn, and then I'm going to be left with a rook and a knight versus a rook, and that's going to be a draw. So my goal is not to trade off all the pawns. I'm just using the pawn break to open a file, so that way my rook gets some more activity. So he took the pawn. That's fine. Let's just take back the pawn. My knight could go to the d3 square, forking the rook and the bishop. He didn't allow that, but I think he made a mistake. I want you guys to notice how he puts his bishop on e3, which is attacking my knight. This is called a drawback mistake, by the way. Basically, his rook on e1 is no longer guarding the e4 square. And I want you guys to keep something in mind. Let me just play the move. Let's play knight e4. That's just a fork. Now, what I have noticed in my games and doing a lot of these speedruns is once players get to like the 1800, 1900, 2000 level, they play like strong chess, high quality chess. It's the same with my game. I play against grandmasters in tournament, and I play strong chess. I play high quality chess. But the moment I go to the end game playing against a grandmaster, I just lose. It's like I just don't know how to play chess. Now, I'm saying all of this to say persons are just horrible in the end game, including myself. Like, if I'm playing against persons lower than me or at my level or a bit higher than my level, then I'm doing good. But if I'm playing against someone who's way stronger than me, the end game strength is just a huge gap. So if you don't know what to do in the end game, it's not causing you just a bit of rating points. It's causing you hundreds of rating points. Let's take the free pawn on c3. My knight could simply go back to the d5 square. I'm now just ahead by 2 pawns. I'm saying all of this to say, ensure that your end game skills is very, very true. Please train your end game skills. He plays rook to c1. He's attacking my knight. No, I don't want to take this pawn on c7 because it will allow his rook to get to my c7 square. And we know that rooks on the 7 is in heaven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my knight back to 5, keeping my knight in the center, controlling the c7 square. And then the plan from here is to create a pass pawn because I have 2 pawns versus 1 pawn. Please train your endgame skills. So my opponent plays bishop to d4. Decent idea. He is trying to centralize his bishop. My rook is not necessarily doing anything, but if I try to get my rook in the game, I am going to lose this pawn. So again, in order to win this game, I want you guys to notice I have 2 pawns versus the opponent's 1 pawn. This is called a pawn majority. Whenever you have a pawn majority, always start by advancing the pawn without the counterpart. Now, what I mean by that is advance the pawn. It does not have any pawns in front of it. Then we can advance this pawn, and then we're just going to keep advancing the pawn. And if we do simple math, 2 pawn versus 1 pawn, 1 cancel 1, then I'm going to be left with a pass pawn. So I want you guys to notice, this guy played the opening well, but the middle game was where he went wrong. Rook to c5 was played, same idea, pawn to b4, advancing the pawn without the counterpart. Then I'm going to play pawn to a5, pawn to a4, rook to b8, pawn to b3, and then I'm going to win the game. Now, rook to b5 is a very nice move. It's a very nice move, actually, because I think I miscalculated. Well, I misevaluated how strong rook to b7 really is. So I think I'm still going to play pawn to b5, then he checks. I'm forced to go here. Then I can't do that. Maybe I have to go to c8. And then when he checks, I go here. Let's go rook to c8. The only thing is, I may lose my a7 pawn. And now I'm just going to be ahead by 1 pawn. It's not the end of the world, though, because once I get my rook to c2, I'm going to be attacking this pawn anyways. He only has 40 seconds on the clock. So I want you guys to know, this is what I mean. Like, I do not have the best endgame skills either. My endgame skill is just way better than, I think my endgame skills is actually better than persons at my level and persons below. Now, after rook to c7, I'm going to block the check. If he wants to trade rooks and then win the pawn, it's actually vector for me because I want to trade pieces anyways. Now, I'm thinking of going here, get the bishop, but then he goes here and tap my knight. So I want to teach you guys, I'm going to just flag him, by the way, so don't worry about my time. I'm going to use this pawn as a pawn without a counterpart. But let me start by centralizing my knight, guarding my pawn, and then I'm going to play moves like h5, g5, and that's how I'm going to win the game. Now, I'm going to try to ensure that you guys see as well. So I'm going to try not to talk too much and then try to actually win the game. So let's play h5. My goal here is to play g5. Let's see what he plays. Okay, now I play g5. Then the goal is to play h4. I'm not necessarily going to be rushing this, by the way, because if I rush to play pawn to h4, his king gets the g4 square. So now I'm going to be improving my king. Remember what we said? We push past pawns, we activate the king, and okay, he doesn't have any more time on the clock. But basically, how I would win this game is I would first get my king in the game, create a pass pawn on this side of the board, then run my king to the other side of the board using the fox in the chicken coop technique. But let's just play king to f5. My opponent lost on time. Very, very good game for my opponent. What have we learned from this? Please improve your endgame skills. If your rating is stuck at the same level and you think you know everything, maybe you're someone who just focus on learning openings and your endgame skills is not improving. I'm going to be doing the same thing, but against someone at the 2000 level. Stick around. Our opponent is now in the 2000 region. Let's hit him with d4. We're still going to be doing the same thing. We're playing against a Caro-Kann defense. Let's play pawn to d4. We're just going to be playing principled chess. The guy's 2000, so we have to have some respect. Let's play knight c3. I'm basically guarding my pawn, and then once he takes, I play knight takes e4. And then after knight f6, I'm not going to try the alien gambit. Let's just take on f6. And then after he takes, I'm going to be playing all the theoretical correct move. For example, if I play a regular development move like knight f3, he's going to pin my knight, and that's too annoying. If I play bishop to d3, he's going to take the free pawn. So I'm going to start by playing pawn to c3, protecting my pawn on d4. Then I play bishop to d3. Now, my opponent immediately castled the king. These are all theoretical correct moves, by the way. Now I'm going to play the move queen to c2. Now, this is called a back trick. I'm applying pressure to the opponent's pawn on h7. The best move here is to play rook e8 and check my king. But now I'm just going to play knight to e2, developing my knight and blocking the check. My opponent decided to play the move pawn to g6. He's basically just protecting his pawns on h7. And now I'll simply castle my king, get my king out the center of the board. So nobody has an advantage in this position. It's just going to be developing the pieces. I just need to come up with a plan. And then usually the plan in this position is to advance the queenside pawns, create a pass pawn on d5. But we cannot rush the game at this high level. Bishop to e6 was played. He's basically just completing his development. And I'm already thinking of playing bishop to e3 to also complete my development. But I like the idea of playing knight to f4 because these high levels, you have to try to gain any small slight advantage as you can. And I think if I play knight to f4, I will be forcing him to move the bishop again. But for now, let's just play the principled bishop to e3. I think knight to f4 will be coming anyways. For example, after knight to d7, now I'm going to play knight to f4. And I guess he's able to take my knight, and you could say he's forcing me to move the bishop more than once. But I could say I have the bishop here. And my opponent being at 2000, did he just make a mistake? Because he placed pawn c5. The pawn is no longer guarding the d5 square. Am I able to play pawn to d5 and trap the bishop? Now, what I would love to do is play pawn d5 and trap the bishop. And if the bishop goes here, I play h3. But I think he's able to simply take my knight on f4. So that is not going to work. So let's just take on e6. I could confidently say I have the bishop here. And once you have the bishop here, is considered to be an advantage. He plays rook takes. Now, if I takes, his knight is going to take, and then he's doing fine. But then I'm thinking of playing bishop to c4, attacking his rook, forcing the rook to move, then swing my rook to the open d file, and then his bishop is going to be pinned to the queen. I'm also considering just playing rook to d1, but then he takes, and then I don't want my bishop on d4. Now, if I takes and he plays bishop takes, I could still play bishop c4. So let's just take on c5. It does not matter how he takes. I'm going to play bishop to c4, gain a tempo on his rook. Then I'm going to play rook to d1, get my last piece in the game. So he decided to take with the bishop. Let's play bishop c4, applying some pressure to his rook. Rook to d6 could be considered as a nice move, especially since he's trying to get control over the d file. But then if he puts his rook on d6, my plan was to play bishop to f4. So he pulls his rook back to e7. I want to take his knight, but then after I takes and I play rook here, he is able to play rook to d7, and I do not necessarily have an advantage, which means if I takes, I am actually improving his pieces. So let's play bishop to f4 here. I don't want to improve his pieces. I need to be aware of the fact that both of my bishops are unprotected, especially at the higher levels. It's crucial that you don't have any unprotected pieces. Unprotected pieces will be the main reason why there's tactics in a certain position. Now, if you look on my pieces, both of my rooks are the only two pieces that are not in the game. So my planning here is obvious. Play rook to d1, play rook to e1. I am also thinking of playing h4 followed by h5. So that way I'm able to take on g6. And then if he takes back on g6, my queen is able to take on g6 because his f7 pawn is pinned. That could also be an idea. So the opponent decided to play queen to b6. Not a bad move. It's very important that we look on the opponent's last move. b2 is safe, f2 is safe. So I'm doing fine there. I could get my rook on the open file. I think he's going to play knight e5 regardless of the move that I play. I really like the idea of playing h4. Now keep in mind, you should not be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on. So h4 is a bit risky. Now if h4 knight e5, I may just take the knight. But let's see. Let's play h4 in this position. My plan is to play h4. And again, if he plays h5, it's completely losing because his f7 pawn is pinned. So he decided to play the move rook to e8. He's doubling up his rooks on the e file, which means he is threatening moves like rook to e4. So if I play h5 and he plays rook to e4, am I able to take on g6? Because once he takes on c4, I take on f7. I'm forking the king and the rook. The king has to take. My queen takes on h7. And that's gonna be a dangerous attack. Now, I am gonna be down by a piece, but that's going to be a very dangerous attack. So let's play pawn to h5. This is very risky, by the way, because I've seen myself being down by a piece, but I'm going to get like 2 pawns for the piece. So that's good enough. And the reason why it's so risky is both of my rooks are not doing anything in the game. So I need to get my rooks in the game, but I'm just going for this idea. And then once I get this idea, then I may get my rooks in the game. So rook to e4 was played. I was expecting that move. Let's take on g6. If he takes on c4, I was also expecting that we take on f7, which means the king has to take on f7, and then my queen takes on h7. This cannot be losing. Yes, I'm down by a piece, but the guy's king is weak. I will be skewering his knight and his king. So once his king goes to e6, I should be able to play rook to e1, checking his king, but then he's able to block with the knight. I don't know. I have an attack on the king. Let's see. The king has to take, by the way. Oh, my opponent resigns.